Chapter 157. In the afternoon, Rinpoche walked out of the palace wearing the official uniform of the imperial deputy prefect. There were already 2 carriages waiting outside the square. Both were pulled by crooked cows, but their appearances were very different. One was from the palace and it was pulled by 2 crooked oxen. The carriage was completely made of wood, and it gave off a wooden fragrance. The coachman was an old man with short white hair and a square face. He looked very solemn. The other carriage belonged to Tao Jiyuan. It was also pulled by 2 crooked cows, but the carriage was slightly smaller. Behind the 2 carriages, there were 4 rows of cavalrymen in leather armor. They didn't wear helmets and only had a feather on their shoulders. This was the most elite army under the Empress, the winged cavalry. There were only 1,500 of them, but the weakest among them was no weaker than an earth rank expert in Great Xia. Those who had just attained the earth wheel level could hold a military position below rank 7 in Great Xia. The same strength could also hold a military position below rank 9 in Dayo. However, they were just ordinary cavalrymen in the winged cavalry. These winged cavalry were riding on huge goats. These animals ran very fast and were especially good at jumping. They were comparable to the mountain-gazing birds when it came to climbing mountains, but it was a little more bumpy. The reason why they chose this kind of mount instead of the mountain-gazing birds was probably because these cavalrymen were huge and their weapons were too heavy. On the other hand, when a large number of mountain-gazing birds gathered together, the smell was really hard to resist. Thank you very much. Rinpoche waited for the imperial guard behind him to put his luggage in the carriage before cupping his hands and thanking him. This imperial guard was also very familiar with him. He and another imperial guard were usually at the entrance of Pingle Park. Today he was on duty. That imperial guard grinned widely, cupped his hands at Rinpoche and returned to the palace. Deputy Prefect Ren. Tao Jiyuan came down from the carriage and greeted him. In the morning he didn't look at Rinpoche carefully. At this moment he carefully scanned Rinpoche from top to bottom and didn't see anything special. However, when Sir Feng returned just now, he actually asked him to listen to Rinpoche's arrangements. This made him feel astonished. He really wanted to know what they talked about in the palace after he left. It was a pity that Feng Ho kept this matter to himself. He couldn't possibly say that he didn't understand what Rinpoche said, right? Looking at Rinpoche's confident look and those words that he didn't understand, Feng Ho wavered a little. He didn't know if Rinpoche really understood these things. At this moment, the Empress opened her mouth and said, "In that case, let's leave it at that for now. We will know when the time comes." Seeing this, Feng Ho swallowed all the words he wanted to say and waited to see how Rinpoche's trip to the iron mine was going. Deputy Prefect Rin, may I ask if we are setting off? Tengji dismounted from his mount, took a few steps forward and asked. Thank you for your hard work, Captain. Let's go, Rinpoche said. At the same time he looked back at the tightly shut palace gates before turning around and getting into the carriage. The carriage pulled by the 2 crooked oxen wasn't big, only about 1.6 meters. If one wanted to lie down, one would have to stretch one's feet out. The floor inside was covered with a layer of fur, and there was a small table on the side for placing drinks or fruits. However, the carriages at this time had wooden wheels and were very bumpy. They could only store alcohol in the city, but once they were out of the city, there was no need to think about it. Rinpoche sat cross-legged in the carriage, leaned against the wall, lifted the curtain and looked outside. Following that, Tengji gave the order, "Move out." Everyone turned their mounts around, and the oxen carriage moved forward slowly. When they were out of the city, the speed of the carriage increased. Rinpoche looked at the scenery outside along the way and felt the tremors of the carriage. He could even feel a small stone being pushed over. Fortunately, the fur cushion under his body played a big role. However, even so, he couldn't sit still after 4 hours. He lifted the curtain and squeezed to the side of the coachman, feeling the wind and dust on his face. After a while, he returned to the carriage with a mouthful of dust. Long-distance travel in this world is simply torture. Rinpoche heaved a deep sigh and continued to lift the curtain to look outside. There weren't many sceneries to see in this world. There were only mountains, rivers, fields, and occasionally, animals that were startled by the roadside. In the beginning it was still somewhat refreshing to look at, but after a long time, it became boring. Now, he somewhat regretted that he didn't bring his e-book along. At least he had something to pass the time. At the same time, a thought emerged in his mind. If he were to return to Earth in the carriage, where would he be when he reappeared? Or would he be in the carriage? Or would he be at the place where he disappeared? The journey this time around would take 5 days. He really wanted to give it a try. Unfortunately, if he disappeared, He reckoned that he would be discovered in less than half a day. Rinpoche lifted the curtain and asked the coachman, "How much longer before we can rest?" "Sir Deputy Prefect, there is a village in front." The coachman looked very familiar and directly replied. Rinpoche nodded his head and surveyed the surroundings. At this moment, it was already dark and he couldn't see anything. He could only hear the howls of wild beasts in the night sky from time to time. After another hour, the horseman in front slowed down and eventually came to a complete stop. Tengji turned to the side of Rinpoche and Tao Jiyuan's carriage and shouted, "Sir, Loya village is in front. Please wait for a moment and wait to inform the village chief." After a while, the horseman in front returned and the group continued to slow down. Rinpoche had never seen a village in this world, so he lifted the curtain and sat beside the coachman. The village wasn't too big. After standing for a distance, he could see a circle of wooden fences in front. It was probably to prevent wild beasts from entering. Therefore, even though it was called a village, it was more like a stockade. Rinpoche guessed that the Aboriginals used to live like this when they were in the mountains, and some of them still maintain this habit after they left the mountains. After a long time, this tradition was passed down. Rinpoche asked the coachman, and the truth was exactly as he thought. If there were no attacks from wild beasts, perhaps after a few decades or hundreds of years as the village expanded, these wooden fences would also disappear. As the group entered the village, the entire appearance of the village was revealed in front of Rinpoche. Most of the buildings were made of wood, and the bottom of the buildings were supported by wooden stakes that were at least 20 centimeters in diameter. They were about half a meter tall and were completely used to prevent rainwater and some snakes and insects. There was a fishy smell in the village. Many of the houses had animal skins and dried wild vegetables that were being hung to dry. As a result, the smell was very strong. When they realized that the army had entered the villagers weren't afraid at all. They walked out of their houses and waved to the crowd with a smile. Most of their clothes were animal skins, revealing their bronze skin. The smiles on their faces were very simple and full of enthusiasm. However, when they saw Rinpoche sitting in the carriage, they curiously sized him up. After all, with one look, they could tell that he wasn't an Aboriginal. The relationship between the Aboriginal army and the commoners is very good. Rinpoche immediately had this thought. The village was almost circular in shape. In the middle was a circular open space. There were many things like stone locks. Presumably, these were used by the villagers to hone their bodies when they had nothing to do. At the side, there was also a wooden shelf with some wooden sticks on it. From this village, one could see how much the Aboriginals valued martial arts. The residences were built around this open space and were divided into 2 levels. There were about 100 households in one sweep, and the entire village had about 200 to 300 people. At this moment, every household had lit up their oil lamps. Some people came out to greet them while others leaned against the window and looked outside. Rinpoche got down from the carriage and stretched his body. This day's journey was really too torturous. At this moment he could finally relax. Tao Jiyuan also jumped down from the carriage at the side. However, he looked much better than Rinpoche and didn't seem to be tired. "Sirs, this is the village chief. The biggest house belongs to the village chief. Tonight, the 2 sirs will be resting at the village chief's house." Tengji brought an old man over. "Greetings to the 2 sirs. Thank you for your trouble." Rinpoche cupped his hands and said. On the other hand, Tao Jiyuan nodded his head. After staying at the village chief's house for a night, Rinpoche endured the buzzing sound of the mosquitoes. The next morning he yawned and went straight into the carriage. He swore in his heart that he would rather stay in the carriage next time. He didn't know if it was because of those animal skins that were drying outside that attracted so many mosquitoes. Furthermore, they only bit him. At least when he asked Tao Jiyuan in the morning, he didn't get bitten by the mosquitoes. Even these mosquitoes knew how to bully the weak and fear the strong. Chapter 159. After 4 bumpy days on the road, Rinpoche saw many things along the way. What surprised him the most was that every time they stopped at a village, the winged cavalry warriors would teach the children martial arts in the morning. Even though it wasn't much, a little bit of guidance was already very valuable to these children as it could help them avoid many detours. The Aboriginals spared no effort in this aspect, as well as the relationship between the army and the commoners, made Rinpoche feel sentimental. This was rarely seen in history. Other than a few armies such as the current dynasty, most of the time the commoners viewed the army as tigers and wolves. A few days later, when they arrived at a small city, Rinpoche suggested resting for a day. Even though the others were a little dissatisfied with this request, they didn't say much. After all, Rinpoche's identity was special. Rinpoche told the others not to disturb him and to place the food at the door before returning to Earth. The long and arduous journey these few days had indeed made him unbearably tired and he needed a good rest. Even though it was a little pretentious, it was worth a try. After all, he was just an ordinary person. Even after arriving in Dayo, he didn't suffer much. The toughest time was probably the night of the Great Hunt. That time, he was more mentally tense and couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as the fatigue he felt this time. Even if he didn't talk about these, it was time. Finding a place to stay now was better than suddenly disappearing tomorrow. After Rinpoche returned, he immediately threw himself onto the bed. It was soft, quiet, and the bed wasn't bumpy at all. It was simply too comfortable. After sleeping for 4 to 5 hours, Rinpoche woke up. He was also unwilling to move and tossed and turned on the bed. After a long time, he finally got out of bed and made himself a cup of instant noodles. After staying at home for 3 days, Rinpoche once again returned to that world. It was midnight. After lying on the bed for a few hours, he heard a knock on the door. "Sir Deputy Prefect." "Come in." Rinpoche sat up from the bed. "Sir Deputy Prefect, it's time to set off." The person who entered was Tingji. After seeing Rinpoche, he finally felt relieved. On this day, Rinpoche didn't make a single sound in the room. The food at the door was also left untouched, which made him feel uneasy. If Rinpoche hadn't informed him in advance, he would have barged in. "All right, I got it." Rinpoche nodded his head, got out of bed, and washed up. An hour later, he returned to the carriage and continued his journey. Mount Damo was one of the 2 iron mines in Dayo, and it was filled with all kinds of prisoners. Most of them were soldiers from other countries who were captured during the border conflicts between Dayo and the other countries. The Aboriginals weren't stupid and knew how to use war criminals to open up mines. As for the prisoners on death row in the south, they were the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. Rinpoche sized up these people as he walked. Their complexions were still all right, completely different from the sallow and emaciated state he had imagined. Many of them had bulging muscles. After all, working here, even an ordinary person's body would develop a body of muscles after a long time. However, if he really had the body of an ordinary person, he probably wouldn't be able to live for long. Everyone was only wearing tattered pants, and their tanned upper bodies were covered in scars. Some were from mining and some were from whips. Apart from that, each of them had a rope tied around their feet. Every 3 of them were tied together, and the distance between them was about 2 meters. After asking, Rinpoche found out that the rope was woven from the bark of a type of tree known as the knot tree and then soaked in oil. It was very sturdy and even a man-realm expert couldn't tear it apart. Even swords would have to expend some effort to cut it. On the way up, Rinpoche saw a few people with missing limbs. They were using their hands to pick up the scattered slag from the ground and put it into a basket. While observing these people, he also saw that they were looking at him with hope in their eyes. Their numb eyes were filled with a look of longing. Rinpoche knew what they were longing for, but it was a pity that he couldn't help them. After the people in front were driven away, Rinpoche followed Gu Qiong to the front of Mount Damo. From where everyone got off the train at the foot of the mountain, the first thing they saw was a large platform with many wooden houses. This was where everyone rested. Following which, there was another small platform. After which, there was a pitch-black Mount Damo without any soil or weeds. It was as if it was made of iron. The mining here was done layer by layer from the outside to the inside. There were no tunnels or anything like that. There were all kinds of racks in front of Mount Damo. Everyone climbed on the racks and slowly mined along the protruding edges. This way it would be easier. However, after reaching a certain height, even the racks couldn't reach the top. Hence, they had to continue digging deeper. "Sir, the iron mine in Mount Damo is really difficult to mine. Even with my strength, I can only mine a small piece in one go." As Gu Qiong spoke, he picked up a pickaxe from the side and smashed it against the dark iron wall with a whistling sound. Dang! Sparks flew from the explosion. The wooden rake of the pickaxe was immediately smashed into pieces. The head of the pickaxe flew out and spun a few times in the air before falling to the ground. Along with the head of the pickaxe, there were some small fragments that were about the size of a fist. Those people can't even mine such a big piece in a day. So hard? Even though Rinpoche had heard about it before, he was still shocked. Even though he didn't know Gu Qiong's actual strength as the person in charge of this mine, he had 300 guards under him. His strength couldn't be weak. Furthermore, Rinpoche clearly saw that the wooden handle of the pickaxe, which was as thick as a wrist, was directly smashed into pieces. Even if he didn't use 500 kilograms of force, he still only managed to smash out a piece the size of a fist. How was this a mine? This was simply an iron mountain. Rinpoche stretched out his hand and touched it. It was indeed iron. The iron content was at least 95% and there were very few rocks. If it wasn't for the fact that there were very few rocks, Rinpoche would have thought that this was man-made and not naturally formed. Even though there were rocks, they were very hard. Rinpoche picked up an iron awl from the ground and pressed it against the link between the iron ore and the rocks. He used a hammer and hit it with all his might. At that moment, sparks flew and there was only a white dot on the rock. Looking at this situation, Rinpoche wasn't very confident about the explosives that he had brought. Even if it was effective, it probably wouldn't meet his expectations. I have no other way. Sir, please feel free to look around. Gu Qiong didn't have much hope for the two of them. In fact, in his heart he could only mine slowly like this. He wasn't very optimistic about the purpose of their trip. Tao Jiyuan was already clear about the situation here. He looked at Rinpoche with ease and wanted to see if this person, who was personally appointed by Her Majesty, was really capable. After interacting with Rinpoche for a few days, she could tell from his words that he indeed had some ideas in some areas. Furthermore, he always said some strange things, but it was useless to just talk. There were plenty of countries that were full of boastful words. He was also a little unconvinced that this person was actually favored by Her Majesty. Therefore, he wanted to see if this person was relying on Her Majesty's favor to be whimsical and deceive Her Majesty with his big talk, or if he really had a way. If he was personally appointed by Her Majesty to be the person in charge with great fanfare and returned with his tail between his legs, it would be interesting. Chapter 161. Rinpoche looked at the iron mountain in front of him. He had some doubts in his heart. Was this really a natural product? Compared to a mine, Rinpoche was more willing to believe that this was a huge piece of meteorite. Unless, billions of years ago, such a huge piece of meteorite fell on the ground. Then, after many years of tectonic movements, the huge basin that should have appeared here became a plain, and this piece of meteorite became Mount Damo. In Rinpoche's heart, this was more likely than a natural product. Otherwise, this iron mountain would be too unusual. Can we make a few holes here? Rinpoche pointed to the protruding part of the mountain wall above his head and asked Gu Qiong. The hole was the size of a fist and had to be at least 1.5 feet deep. The rock wall began to protrude about 3 to 4 meters above Rinpoche's position. It should be very difficult to mine at that height. However, if he were to make a few holes in that area and use explosives, it was very likely that a big piece would be blown off. After all, he wasn't an expert in explosives. He could only roughly guess where the explosion would be more effective. Sir Deputy Prefect, although I don't know what you are planning, but it is indeed impossible to make such a big hole. At most, I can make a hole that is the size of a fist. Any deeper and we have to dig to the side. Gu Qiong said with a troubled look. Rinpoche frowned after hearing this. Gu Qiong's words should be true. However, in this case it would be very difficult for explosives to be of much use. In this kind of situation, if it was on Earth, there were many ways to think of. For example, using acetylene to cut the rock piece by piece. However, most of these methods either required electricity or gas tanks. For example, he could only bring 1 bottle of acetylene at a time. Furthermore, he had to bring it all the way here. Otherwise, based on the road conditions in Dayo, he was afraid that it would blow up halfway. However, if he brought it here, his secret would be exposed to people other than the Empress. This was unacceptable. Bring me around Mount Damo to take a look. Rinpoche pondered for a long time. It was better to take a look at the surrounding situation first. There was still some time before the sky turned dark. At the very least, they could take a look at the situation of the Iron Mountain. Rinpoche realized that this mountain was indeed like what he had imagined. It was a gigantic meteorite. The structure of this mountain was completely different from the surrounding land. All the iron ores were gathered on the mountain. Furthermore, there were very few plants growing on the mountain. All the plants were weeds and the like, which were relatively hardy. It was likely that the dust accumulated on the mountain over many years had formed a layer of soil on the surface of the mountain. This way, the metal could be melted into molten iron in a very short period of time through the reflected light from the concave mirrors. After that, it would be much easier to extract and separate the molten iron. Thermal expansion and contraction? What does that mean? Tao Jiyuan didn't know what Rinpoche was thinking. He was very interested and curious about his idea. We can demonstrate it. Rinpoche pulled everyone out of the house. Start a fire first. Rinpoche gave the order. Gu Qiong immediately called someone to get the wood according to Rinpoche's instructions. After a while, a fire was started. Rinpoche picked up 2 stones and asked someone to use 2 iron awls to roast them on the outside of the fire. The rest of them looked at the instructions and were curious about what he was going to do. After a while, Rinpoche estimated that it was about time and asked someone to throw the stones into a bucket of water that was prepared at the side. First there were some bubbles. After a few minutes, Rinpoche reached into the bucket and fished the stones out. There were already a few cracks on them. Rinpoche showed the stones to everyone. The rest didn't notice anything wrong, but Tao Jiuan had a sudden realization and said, "I see." This was a very normal natural phenomenon. It wasn't that no one had discovered it. It was just that no one had summarized it or investigated the cause. Therefore there was no concept of thermal expansion and contraction. Furthermore, no one had thought of applying this phenomenon to Mount Damo. Why is that? Tao Jiuan asked curiously after a sudden realization. Because an object will expand after being heated. Even if you can't see it with your eyes, it is still expanding. And when an object is cold, it will contract. If this expansion and contraction situation occurs in a short period of time, such a change will occur. This is not only the case for stones but also for iron. Rinpoche gave a rough explanation. If he were to talk about molecules, Tao Jiuan would definitely not understand. Tao Jiuan pondered. Gu Qiong widened his eyes and asked, "Sir Rin, are you thinking of burning down Mount Damo?" "Just burn one place will do." Rinpoche looked around. Even though there wasn't much vegetation on Mount Damo, there was vegetation on the surrounding mountains. Rinpoche asked someone to chop some wood to burn the mountain. Even though the efficiency was still very low, it was worth a try. It would at least speed up the mining process. When he went back, he would research on how to make a concave mirror. By then, he would be able to completely solve the mining problem of Mount Damo. One by one they looked at Rinpoche. "We will know soon," Rinpoche said. He was a little nervous. What he knew was only theory. If it did not succeed, it would be embarrassing. Moreover, a large number of concave mirrors could not be produced in a short period of time. He was afraid that he would be helpless in this place. As the torches shone on the mountain wall, everyone saw that it was still the same as before. Immediately their hearts skipped a beat. Could it be that it did not succeed? Rinpoche did not say a word. He walked until he was 1 meter away from the mountain wall and stopped. He carefully examined the mountain wall. Finally, a look of relief appeared on his face. Cracks, it actually split open. Gu Qiong walked to Rinpoche's side and carefully examined the mountain wall. Immediately he shouted in surprise. Under the light of the torches, the mountain wall of Mount Damo was covered with small cracks. Although the cracks were not very big, the speed of mining along the cracks would be at least 2 times faster. "Sir Rin, this method actually worked. I really admire you. Sir Rin has contributed greatly this time." Tao Jiuan stepped forward and saw the cracks on the mountain wall. At first he was surprised. Then he revealed a look of congratulations. However, to the other party this matter was very simple. After all, Rinpoche didn't have high requirements for precision. He could even throw it to his students and the remuneration was 500,000 yuan. After settling this matter, Rinpoche rested for 2 days before returning to Dayo. Mount Liutsue was actually on the outskirts of the 60,000 mountains on the west side of Dayo. However, to reach the location of the iron ore mine, one would need to walk for 2 days. Furthermore, the mountain road was very difficult. It was the biggest difficulty in transporting the iron ore. A few days after leaving Mount Damo, Rinpoche walked on this mountain road. When he first entered the mountain road was still alright. After all, this road was often used by people. However, after a day the mountain road started to meander and it became difficult to walk. On one side was a mountain wall and on the other side was a mountain stream. There was only a 1 meter wide road in the middle. Even though people could walk, it was impossible for people to ride on mounts. Even if people could walk, they wouldn't be able to walk fast. At least, every time Rinpoche glanced at the bottom of the cliff, he would feel dizzy. One had to know that it was 200 to 300 meters below the cliff. If he fell, he would immediately become a meat patty. Rinpoche suddenly realized that he had a big weakness. He was afraid of heights. He didn't realize this previously. Seeing him like this, Tingji was also on tenterhooks. He followed closely behind Rinpoche, ready to pull him up at any time. If something were to happen to this person, he wouldn't be able to go back. After walking on this road for half a day, they finally arrived at a valley with cliffs on 3 sides. Rinpoche could finally relax and felt that he was alive again. The valley wasn't too big. Other than over 100 guards, there were about 700 to 800 people mining here. Chapter 164. In the valley where Mount Liutsue's iron mine was located, The ground was so hard that not even weeds could grow. Not long after entering, there were a few rows of wooden buildings. There were no fences or anything like that around them. Most of the people here were aboriginals. After mining here for a few years, they would be released early. Usually no one escaped and the guards were not strict. Rinpoche had already stayed here for 2 days. Every day he would use a piece of cloth to cover his face and walk around. There was too much dust in the valley. All of it had drifted over from the mines. When one woke up, they would find that their surroundings were covered in dust. The quality of this iron or mine was average, but it was easy to mine. It was currently the most productive iron or mine in Dayo, although it was not much compared to the iron ore on Earth. For the past 2 days, Rinpoche had been pondering how to make transportation easier. As long as the supply and the transportation of ores could keep up, the output of the iron mine could increase by several times or even more. The valley was surrounded by cliffs on 3 sides, and one of them was the narrow path. Regardless of whether it was the ore being transported out or the supplies being transported in, they all passed through this path. On the other side was a deep mountain stream. There was a stream at the bottom, but after a short distance, it flowed into the ground. As for the other 2 sides, they both led to the 60,000 mountains, and it was not easy to get in and out. It was not realistic to open a path from this side. At first, Rinpoche considered using a cable to transport the weapons. However, if Dayo had the steel to make cables, it would have been used to forge weapons. Furthermore, the materials required for the cable could only be produced in Dayo in a few years. Moreover, the support required for the cable was something that was difficult to build in this world. As for the rope, there was no need to think about it. It would wear out too quickly and it was not practical to use it to transport ores. In addition, Rinpoche had also considered using hot air balloons. However, considering the difficulty of manufacturing hot air balloons and the amount of fuel required, he was afraid that the transportation speed of 2 or 3 hot air balloons wouldn't be much faster than the current method of carrying people. Not to mention the airflow in the valley, hot air balloons were never meant to be used as a means of transportation. No matter how he thought about it, the only possibility was to open a tunnel. Rinpoche pointed at the mountain in front of them and asked Tao Jiuan, "Have you ever thought of opening a hole on this mountain that leads directly to the other side?" "Sure, Sir Rin, just think about it and don't say it out loud," Tao Jiuan said nervously. "What's wrong?" Rinpoche was astonished. Chapter 165. Rinpoche had always felt that he was rather cowardly, but wasn't cowardice the longer one could live? Every day there were so many people who felt that they were powerful and wanted to die. In the end they really died. This kind of news made people vigilant. For example, a woman's clothes were scratched by a tire repairman, and she refused to forgive him. Her father also grabbed the repairman and beat him, even if the repairman knelt down and begged for mercy. One had to know that kneeling in China was a big deal. However, the father and daughter were still unwilling to give up and continued to smash the stall. In the end, the common man was enraged and his blood splattered 3 feet. Every time Rinpoche saw such news, he would be on high alert. It was better to be a coward. Just like in the afternoon when he heard that anyone who saw a bichi would encounter a disaster and that it was extremely effective, he immediately followed the advice and suppressed his great curiosity. Even if she looked like a flower, he wouldn't look at her anymore. But what is this little thing in front of me now? Rinpoche's head was filled with question marks. It was crimson red and looked a little like a fox. Its bean-sized eyes were full of cunning. Most importantly, it had a pair of wings on its back, fleshy like a bat's. Just now, when Rinpoche was in a daze in the room, this little thing suddenly came in through the window and stared at Rinpoche. "I'm already avoiding you and there's no enmity between us. Why do you have to do this?" Rinpoche looked innocent. Rinpoche felt that it was necessary for him to know what the other party was up to. It couldn't be that they were just here to see him, right? Although the other party was a wild beasts were intelligent. Even crows had the IQ of an 8-year-old child. The intelligence of weasels and foxes was not low, so the person in front of him should not be an idiot, right? "Take whatever you like. Consider it as a gift from me," Rinpoche said tentatively. It was obvious that Rinpoche was overthinking. At the very least, the other party didn't understand human nature and didn't know what he was talking about. Her pair of bean-sized eyes continued to stare at him. Rinpoche suddenly realized that this little thing's eyes didn't seem to be staring at him. Instead, it was staring at his hand or the side of his hand. This little thing's eyes were so big and it was staring right at him. He didn't know what it was looking at, but he subconsciously felt that it was staring at him. After some time, Rinpoche finally realized that the other party wasn't looking at him. Instead, it was the white rabbit creamy candies in his hand. Ren Baqin picked up the white rabbit creamy candy and shook it left and right. The little creature's eyes also moved left and right. I'm giving it to you. Remember to peel it open and eat it. Ren Baqin didn't know if it could understand him, so he threw the bag of white rabbit creamy candy to the side. In a flash, the little thing picked up the bag with its mouth, transformed into a scarlet shadow, and disappeared into the night sky outside the window. Ren Baqin rubbed his head. Just now he had nothing to do and ate 2 pieces of candy. Was this thing attracted by the candy? That shouldn't be possible. The 2 cows were led up the mountain. They were so far away. Even an immortal wouldn't be able to smell the sugar. But no matter what, the white rabbit had once again performed a meritorious deed. Lin Shaola, the empress, and this is called a bichi, right? The white rabbit's charm was irresistible. After thinking about it, Ren Baqin decided to close the window. Even if it was a little stuffy, he would accept it. In the middle of the night, Ren Baqin felt that he had a dream. In his dream, the mountains were shaking, and there was a loud roar of a beast in the distance. Just when he wanted to investigate further, he suddenly heard a rumbling sound from the surroundings. Then the entire house collapsed. Teng Ji and Tao Jiyuan felt the ground trembling and hurriedly ran out of the room. Just when they wanted to pull Ren Baqin out of the room, they heard a rumbling sound. The wooden house that Ren Baqin was staying in had collapsed. Immediately the 2 of them tensed up. Anything could happen to anyone during this trip, except for the person inside the house. However, something had to happen to him. Save him, quickly save him, Tao Jiyuan shouted loudly. Without saying a word, Teng Ji rushed to the front of the house and started to lift up the collapsed roof. When the house collapsed, he lifted up a large piece of the shattered roof with his bare hands and threw it to the side. Save him, quickly save Sir Ren, Tao Jiyuan shouted at the other winged cavalry warriors who were rushing over. Sir Ren, are you all right? Sir Ren? Teng Ji was also shouting at the pile of broken wood. One after another, the rest of the people came over to help. They threw out the broken wood and dug towards the location of Ren Baqin's bed. At this moment, Ren Baqin's mind was in a mess. The beam of the wooden house was broken from the top, and the other end was supported by the collapsed wall. It was just enough for him to hide inside and not suffer any injuries. Even so, his heart was beating rapidly. Did he encounter an earthquake? If it wasn't for his good luck, he would have died here. As he thought about it, Ren Baqin curled his body into a ball and didn't dare to move in the darkness. When he heard the shouting outside, he immediately shouted loudly. After a while, Ren Baqin was dug out from the inside with dust all over his body. Looking at the starry sky and the surrounding torches, a feeling of surviving a calamity immediately welled up in his heart. Sir Ren, your luck is really good. You actually didn't suffer any injuries. Chapter 166. That's the meaning of the words. Fortune and misfortune go hand in hand with each other. However, during this period of time, the people around you will only encounter misfortune and not fortune, Tao Jiyuan said with an ugly look on his face. Everyone looked at Ren Baqin as if they were looking at a pile of feces. Ren Baqin turned his head to look at the people around him and thought that this couldn't be true, right? Then he pointed to the distance with an innocent face and said, "There's a fire, let's put it out first." Everyone turned to look at the kitchen that was on fire not far away, then turned to look at Ren Baqin and took another step back. The guards in the distance had already rushed over to put out the fire. Now even Ren Baqin felt that it was too strange. However, it could also be a coincidence. He hoped that was the case. Otherwise, how could he return to the city with the attribute of a jinx? Just now, it was only a very small earthquake that stopped in less than a minute. Everyone waited for a while, and seeing that nothing happened, they went back to rest in 2s and 3s. Ren Baqin's residence was changed to the wooden house that Tao Jiyuan originally stayed in. Tao Jiyuan ran over to squeeze in with Teng Ji and the other winged cavalry warriors. Now he was unwilling to sleep in the same house as Ren Baqin. Ren Baqin slept in the house that Tao Jiyuan slept in previously. He was on tenterhooks for half a day, afraid that something would happen again. After a long time he fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, everyone started to pack their things and prepared to leave the mountain. In fact, there wasn't much to pack. However, Teng Ji specially asked for a tree bark rope from the guards and tied it around Ren Baqin's waist. If it was before, he would only be a little worried. However, after the incident with the Bichi, his worry had escalated from a little to a lot. If anything happened to Ren Baqin, they would really only have misfortune and no fortune. As they walked out of the mountain, other than an extremely skilled winged cavalry warrior who walked in front of Ren Baqin and Teng Ji who followed behind, everyone else stayed far away. Especially Tao Jiyuan, he had already hidden at the back. I feel that there should be no problem. It's not like the Grim Reaper is here. They had already walked more than half of the mountain path. After the initial nervousness, Renbachien gradually relaxed. Even if the Bichi really brought bad luck to people, it wouldn't be so immediate and frightening. However, Tingji didn't know what the Grim Reaper meant. His words couldn't make the other party relax. Sir Ren, as long as we leave the mountain, there will be no problems, Tingji said. Renbachien and the others heaved a sigh of relief as they walked through this section of the mountain road while trembling with fear. Fortunately, it shouldn't be that serious. Renbachien turned his head and smiled. Even though everyone said so about the Bichi, Renbachien was still a little skeptical after the two incidents that happened last night. Even though Renbachien had transmigrated and seen the Kirin before, he still instinctively didn't believe in such mysterious things. This was the result of the education he had received and the habits he had cultivated. Just as Renbachien was speaking, a shadow suddenly covered his entire body. Tengji's facial expression immediately changed. He pulled out his long saber and leaped towards Renbachien's head. His speed was so fast that Renbachien almost didn't have time to react. The people at the back could see a huge bird with a wingspan of 7 to 8 meters rapidly descending from the sky. It extended its sharp claws and pounced toward Renbachien. Tengji slashed out with his blade and blood rained down from the sky. Soon after, the bird let out a miserable shriek and fell to the ground. The entire bird's chest and abdomen were split open by Tengji's blade. The contents of the bird's stomach splashed all over Renbachien's head and face. Renbachien happened to raise his head to look and was splashed by the liquid. He almost vomited. Sir Ren, are you all right? Tengji turned around and looked at Renbachien after he landed on the ground. Renbachien wiped his face, pulled out a handful of internal organs and threw them to the ground. The stench went straight into his nose and his stomach felt like it was overturned. Water, water. Renbachien hurriedly shouted. Immediately, someone passed him a water bag and let him splash his face. His body was still covered in blood, but Renbachien finally felt that he was alive again. Just now, he almost thought that he was going to die from disgust. He hurriedly found a small stream nearby, took off his clothes and washed his body. Only then did he stand there with his pants on and let out a long sigh. I'm sorry, Sir Ren. I was too anxious just now. Tengji cupped his fists and apologized. It's all right. It's all thanks to you. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would be in trouble. Renbachien waved his hand. What kind of bird is that? It actually dared to capture a human. While walking back he asked. It's a flower eagle. This thing usually catches wild beasts in the mountains to eat. Occasionally it will attack humans, but it's very rare. I'm afraid that Sir Ren's aura isn't strong, which made it embolden its courage to attack, Tengji said. Does this mean that I'm too weak and easy to bully? Renbachien walked back and prepared to see what exactly the flower eagle looked like. When he reached the place, he saw that everyone was already plucking its feathers. Sir, you are in luck today. This flower eagle is extremely difficult to catch and its taste is even better. Tao Jiyuan stood at a distance and smiled at Renbachien. Renbachien was speechless. Don't delay this matter or else you will be severely punished, the Empress said coldly. This subject obeys, Feng Ho replied. After Feng Ho left, the Empress said, call Hong Bao over. After a while, Hong Bao carried a cloth bag and walked into Yangxin Palace Hall with large strides. He knelt down on one knee and said, Your Majesty, fortunately, I did not fail you. At the same time he opened the package to reveal a box. It was filled with lime powder and a human head. Clean it and present it to me. After the Empress finished speaking, someone immediately carried the box away. A moment later, the head was presented to the Empress. The Empress took a closer look at the head. The face of the corpse was very ugly, but it indeed looked exactly like that person. Immediately, she felt an indescribable sense of irritation in her heart. She waved her hand and said, Take it away and deal with it. Hong Bao, tell me the details, the Empress asked again. I followed him all the way to Great Xia, and after confirming his route, I waited for him at the Severing Dragon platform. After listening to Hong Bao, the Empress calculated the time and realized that the seventh prince's death happened to be the evening before she was brought to that world by Renbachien. This time around 50 winged cavalry warriors followed Renbachien, Tengji and Tao Jiyuan into the Mount Liutsue iron mine. There were a total of 53 winged cavalry warriors including Renbachien, Tengji and Tao Jiyuan. At this moment, most of the winged cavalry warriors had already dispersed. Some of them continued to look for prey in the surrounding areas. After all, a flower eagle wasn't enough for everyone. Renbachien found a place to sit and rest. He was rubbing a cloud crystal in his hand. This was his big harvest from this trip. At this moment Rinpoche heard a mournful cry in the sky. The sound was so sharp that it seemed to pierce through one's eardrums. It's here. Tengji, who was stabbed into the ground, stood up and looked into the sky. What's here? Rinpoche raised his head and saw a small black dot circling in the sky. The mournful cry came from this small dot that was circling in the sky. Flower eagles usually travel in pairs. If one dies, the other won't survive alone. That flower eagle has found its way here. Tengji said while caressing his long saber. He didn't look nervous at all. If the flower eagle didn't launch a sudden attack, it wouldn't pose too much of a threat. In fact, a flower eagle wasn't considered a powerful creature in the 60,000 mountains. It was just relatively rare and difficult to catch. Some of the surrounding people raised their heads to take a look. Following which, they continued to busy themselves with the things on hand. Evidently they didn't care much about it. When Rinpoche heard Tengji's words, he felt that it was a pity. This kind of animal that was dead while the other wasn't alive was still very touching. It was especially easy to have a good impression of it. This was especially so for young men and women. Chirp. Another mournful cry sounded in the sky. That flower eagle is descending. Rinpoche felt that the flower eagle seemed to have become bigger. Very quickly Rinpoche confirmed his thoughts. That flower eagle was indeed getting bigger. When it was about 200 to 300 meters in the sky, Rinpoche could already feel the power of that flower eagle. Following which, that flower eagle circled in the sky once again. Following which, it ferociously charged in the direction of Rinpoche, Tengji and the rest. That's right, it simply didn't think of leaving this place alive. It only continued to accelerate and carried its entire body weight as it crashed down from the sky. Sir, don't move, Tengji said. When that flower eagle transformed into a brown silhouette in the sky, Tengji leaped 7 to 8 meters into the sky with his saber. With a crash, a rain of blood fell from the sky. 2 pieces of a corpse with internal organs and blood sprinkled down from the sky. If I don't move, I will be drenched in blood again. Rinpoche knew what Tengji was going to do when he saw his actions. He broke into a run and ran to the side. Even though that flower eagle was crashing over at a slanted angle, it was still going vertically downwards. According to the current situation, when Tengji chopped the flower eagle apart, it happened to be on top of his head. This point could also be seen from Tengji's almost vertical leap. However, Rinpoche, who had run 4 to 5 steps away, turned his head and saw that half of the flower eagle's body whizzing towards him. He immediately cursed, "Damn you." If he had stood at his original position, nothing would have happened. However, he ran a few steps to the side. However, that half of the flower eagle's body with its wings just happened to split into 2 before crashing down. Sir, be careful. When the winged cavalry warriors at the side saw this scene, they were shocked. This flower eagle flew down at an extremely fast speed. Even though it was chopped into 2, the force of the falling half of its body wasn't small. If it was someone else, it would still be fine. However, if it was Rinpoche, at the very least, his bones would be broken. A few of the winged cavalry warriors leaped up and pounced towards where Rinpoche was standing. One of them leaped into the air and kicked the falling flower eagle's body. Blood immediately blossomed. That part of the flower eagle's flesh was directly smashed by his kick, but half of its body was also sent flying to the side. Phew! Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Thank you, brother. Rinpoche wiped the blood off his face and thanked that winged cavalry warrior. He then hurriedly ran to wash his hair and face. When he came back, the flower eagle's stomach had already been cut open. Is there any? Rinpoche asked anxiously. No, there are only ordinary gravel. Everyone knew what he was asking and immediately showed him the thing that they took out from the flower eagle's stomach. It was just a handful of very small gravel. Things like cloud crystals could only be encountered and not sought. Rinpoche followed the empress to the garden and sat down in the pavilion. Along the way, Rinpoche told her about the things that happened along the way. In fact, there wasn't much to talk about. He mentioned a few things about Mount Liutsue and wanted to hear what the empress had to say about the thing in the belly of the mountain. After listening, the empress played it down and said, "In the past, there was a legend that there was a monster in there. The first emperor went there before but returned with serious injuries. Since then, the thing in there has been a taboo and I am not very clear about it. If there is a chance in the future, I would like to see what exactly it is. According to the legend, the thing in there has existed for at least 1,000 years." Rinpoche was speechless. There was actually something in there. It was really hard to imagine that it had existed for more than 1,000 years without dying. Could it be that something like the Kirin was in there? Rinpoche suddenly thought of a question that he had never asked before. He had never thought much about it before. However, if there was something in this world that had existed for more than 1,000 years, Rinpoche suddenly felt that the lifespan of the people in this world was very likely to be different from that of the people on Earth. At the thought of this, Rinpoche raised the question. The Empress looked at him in surprise and said, "You actually don't know? Ordinary aboriginals have a lifespan of about 70 to 90 years. If they cultivate to the Kismet heaven level, they can live for 120 to 140 years. If they cultivate to the cardinal heaven level, they can live for 180 to 200 years. After that, there is the longevity heaven level, and it is said that they can live for more than 300 years. The first generation emperor cultivated to the longevity heaven level, but he only reigned for 20 years before his whereabouts were unknown. Kismet heaven, cardinal heaven, and longevity heaven were actually the cultivation realms of the aboriginals. In front of them was the four-way heaven. As long as ordinary aboriginals reached adulthood and practiced a little, they could reach the four-way heaven level, which was equivalent to the man-wheel level. Compared to the great Xia practitioners, there was only one man-wheel expert out of 100. This was a huge advantage. Kismet heaven was equivalent to the earth-wheel level to the heaven-wheel level because the heaven-wheel level was also known as the path to heaven. As the name suggested, if one couldn't make it, one would fall back to the peak of the earth embryo stage. The cardinal heaven level was equivalent to the spirit wheel level. As for the longevity heaven level, it was already a legendary level. It was said that Great Xia also had other levels above the spirit wheel level, but ordinary people didn't know about them. In fact, the aboriginals were much stronger than the practitioners from other countries at the same level. This was completely brought about by the strength of their bodies. Rinpoche had learned about these classifications from Lin Xiaola when he was learning Rui visualization, but he didn't expect that the lifespan of the aboriginals would be so much longer than that of the people on Earth. He originally thought that the aboriginals would at most live for about 100 years. Based on this calculation, Rinpoche was shuttling back and forth between the other world and the real world. Furthermore, the time period wasn't equal. If his body aged according to the time that he had experienced, if he lived for 60 years, only 40 years would have passed in the other world. If his Rui visualization couldn't increase his lifespan, wouldn't he already be old when the Empress was 60 years old? On the other hand, the Empress could at least live to about 180 years old. At this thought, Rinpoche's mood immediately turned sour. After he finished cultivating in the medicinal bath, even though he was still tired, he felt much better than before. At least he didn't feel like his body was hollowed out, and he immediately went to bed. Looking at the time, Rinpoche sat on a stool and took a nap. After about an hour, he realized that the surrounding sky was about to turn dark. He hurriedly rushed to Yangxin Palace Hall to look for the Empress. The Empress was leaning against the wooden couch and reading a book. Not far from the wooden couch was a table, a hot pot, as well as sliced meat and vegetables. "Your Majesty, I am late," Rinpoche said. "It's all right." The Empress waved her hand. Soon after, Rinpoche went forward to add the base ingredients to the hot pot and added some charcoal. Both of them ate the hot pot for a while. Rinpoche looked at the Empress, who was eating silently with her head lowered. He then thought of the figure dressed in red who was sitting on the sofa eating ice cream and watching the morning news while he was making breakfast. His heart stirred and he said, "Your Majesty, do you still want to go to my world to take a look?" This time was different from the previous time. Previously, he accidentally brought the Empress to that world, but this time, Rinpoche took the initiative to invite her. The meaning was also different. This also meant that Rinpoche didn't try to hide anything anymore. In fact, there was no need to hide anymore. The Empress had already been there, so what was the point of hiding? When the Empress heard what Rinpoche said, she looked up at him and nodded slightly. Even though she looked calm on the surface, she was still somewhat happy after hearing what Rinpoche said. And because of this, she looked even calmer on the surface. After eating the hot pot, the Empress called Xanger over and gave her some instructions. "I will be away for a day, don't worry. If anyone wants to see me, tell them that I am cultivating and won't see them." "Your Majesty, it's better for me to follow you there," Xanger quickly said. Every time he saw the Empress, his heart would palpitate with excitement. Any man who was chosen by such a woman to be her husband and then retracted all the spikes on his body would probably not refuse. "I'm hungry." The Empress met his gaze and looked back. "Okay." Rinpoche smiled, turned around, and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Rinpoche first made porridge and then began to fry the eggs. These were all that was left at home. The vegetables that were bought when the Empress was still around had rotted away in the refrigerator. There's a fire. The Empress's cold voice was heard. Rinpoche immediately turned his head and looked around. There were no signs of fire in the surroundings. It's downstairs. Rinpoche then ran out of the kitchen. Sure enough, there was already black smoke drifting up from downstairs. Rinpoche didn't know if there was anyone downstairs. He hurriedly ran upstairs and called the fire department. At the same time he looked down from the window. It was just below him on the 6th floor. Rinpoche also saw half a body sticking out of the window. It was a woman. "I'm calling the fire department," Rinpoche shouted. "Help, the door can't be opened and I can't run out. Please pass me a rope." The woman downstairs raised her head and pleaded. From her voice she didn't sound old. He couldn't make out her appearance as her face was completely black from the smoke. Rinpoche turned his head and looked around. Where was the rope? "Your Majesty, can you do me a favor?" Rinpoche turned his head and asked the Empress. Even though he didn't know the person downstairs, he couldn't possibly let such a woman face the fire alone. It was just a small effort. If he could help, he would help. After all, he was a good person. The Empress's facial expression changed. The person downstairs wasn't an aboriginal. Furthermore, from her voice, it was a woman. However, since Rinpoche requested, she still nodded her head. "I'll trouble your Majesty to help me open the door." Rinpoche thanked her. He hurriedly ran to the corridor in his pajamas, opened the fire hydrant, took out the fire extinguisher and ran to the 6th floor. The Empress followed closely behind him. At this moment there was already someone on the 6th floor. Rinpoche didn't know if it was the person next door or the person downstairs. A middle-aged man was smashing the door lock with a hammer. "Let me do it." Rinpoche saw the situation and put the fire extinguisher aside. Originally he thought that he could get the Empress to smash the door lock with a slap. However, he couldn't do that now that there was someone here. Fortunately, he had over 140 kilograms of strength. He felt that he should be slightly stronger than that middle-aged man. He grabbed the hammer and smashed it twice. The door handle, which was already on the verge of collapse, was smashed down. After Rinpoche finished eating, he kept the bowls and chopsticks before taking out his phone to make a call. Nowadays the Empress needed an identity card. Otherwise it would be troublesome. "I want an identity, a real one, not a fake one," Rinpoche said after the other party picked up the phone. "We don't do this kind of business." The person on the other side of the phone was the place where Rinpoche bought guns twice. Rinpoche really didn't want to trouble Chin. Since the other party could privately run a firearms business in the country, he presumably had a wide network of contacts. An identity card shouldn't be a big problem. In any case, Rinpoche didn't have any connections. Even if he had money, he didn't know who to give it to. He also didn't have the time to bribe someone. 200,000 yuan. You just need to tell me who to look for. After that, let him know first. The other party was silent for a while before replying, "All right." If he wanted a real identity card, he would definitely have to give the other party the Empress's photo and name. As for these people, even though they looked like intelligent people, Rinpoche still couldn't trust them. He was afraid that there would be trouble in the future. The main thing was that the other party's business would make people wary. Chapter 171. An hour later, Rinpoche received a text message. He dialed the number on the message and it was a middle-aged man. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Rinpoche told him about the matter. The gist of it was that he had lost his identity document when he moved here from another place and became an unregistered resident. In fact, both parties were well aware of the truth of the matter. If that was really the case, there was no need to look for him. He could have done it directly at his original location. However, there was no need to say much. The other party did not ask much either. He only made an appointment and hung up the phone. When Rinpoche made the call, he was not far away from the Empress. Seeing that she was looking up at him, he smiled and said, "An identity can reduce a lot of trouble. Moreover, don't you want to see more of this world? If you want to take a plane or go abroad, identification is a must. The identity management in this world is very strict. The internet is also very developed. It can be found out in an instant." The Empress nodded. She had too many things she did not understand about this world. However, there was someone around who understood these things. She just had to listen to his arrangements. "Your Majesty, let me take a photo for you," Rinpoche suddenly said with a smile. The Empress raised her head and was slightly puzzled. "What?" Rinpoche picked up his phone and casually took a picture of the room. He brought the phone to the Empress and said, "It's the same as what you see on TV." the picture can be preserved. I feel that this can preserve the most beautiful moment of your majesty. The Empress looked at the picture on Rinpoche's phone and compared it with the picture of the corner that Rinpoche took just now. She asked curiously, "How is this done?" "It's just like how the human eye can see the scenery. In fact, it's the light that projects the scenery into the human eye, which is then turned into an image by the brain. The same principle applies to cell phones or cameras. Light is cast into the cell phone or camera and the image is left behind." The Empress frowned and pondered for a moment. Her face turned cold and said, "I don't understand. This thing won't suck my soul into it, right?" Rinpoche almost vomited blood when he heard this. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. He did not expect the Empress to be so cute. After spending a long time talking and using his cell phone to search for the principle of the camera, he finally convinced the Empress that this thing would not suck her soul into it and would only leave behind an image. At the same time, he took a picture of himself to make sure that there was no problem. After all, people will always change and the things around them won't exist forever. Whether it's friends or others, taking pictures is to preserve the precious images in one's memory. Besides, it's necessary to take a photo to create an identity. After a long time, the Empress nodded her head slightly to show that she trusted him. This was already an extremely rare trust. After all, the Empress didn't understand such things at all. Rinpoche squatted down in front of the Empress and took a photo of the motionless Empress. He could see that she was a little nervous as her fingers were clenched together. After taking the photo, Rinpoche showed her the upper body of the Empress. She felt that there was nothing wrong with her body and finally felt relieved. "Your Majesty, say eggplant." Rinpoche ran to a nearby location and aimed his phone at the Empress, who was sitting on the sofa. All he got in return was a cold stare. Rinpoche looked at the image of a lady dressed in red with the sun shining on her body. Her face was as beautiful as a painting. Rinpoche became even more excited. He changed a few angles to capture the Empress. After that, he sat beside her and said, "Your Majesty, this will be able to preserve your most beautiful moment forever. Everyone in Dayo and the entire world can see your Majesty at this moment." "I've eaten the jade embryo so I won't grow old," the Empress said coldly. Rinpoche still didn't know about the jade embryo. When Hongwu gave the jade embryo to the Empress, no one explained it to him. After hearing this sentence, he was immediately astonished. After asking around, he found out about the effects of the jade embryo. This was a treasure that everyone, from the head of state to the commoners, would go crazy for. It was a pity that this kind of treasure was extremely rare in that world. Otherwise, Hongwu wouldn't have given it to the Empress as a birthday gift and caused everyone to exclaim in admiration. Rinpoche looked at the photo of the Empress in his phone. He always wanted to take the most beautiful photo of the Empress, print it, and post it to the ends of the earth so that the whole world could see what the Empress of Dayo, the seventh most beautiful person in the world, looked like. For example, it would be pretty good to hang it on the top of the city wall. He just didn't know if anyone would find it disrespectful. At this moment, Rinpoche's thoughts were more or less showing off. Rinpoche looked at the time. It was about time to set off and reach the agreed location. He said to the Empress, "Your Majesty, let's help you with your identity first. After that, we'll take a stroll in the city." After changing his clothes, he came down from the sofa with a phone in his hand. It was prepared previously and only had his phone number saved in it. "Your Majesty, it's more convenient to contact each other if you get separated from each other." Rinpoche passed the phone to the Empress. The Empress had long been curious about this thing. After all, it was possible to hear the voices of people from far away through such a small device. If the army had such a device, it would be too convenient. "How do I use this?" The Empress raised her head and asked. She didn't understand anything about this world. While it was full of novelty, it also made her somewhat uncomfortable. It had been a long time since she felt so powerless. Rinpoche taught the Empress how to use the phone. At the same time, he demonstrated how to dial his own number. He placed the phone beside the Empress's ear and pressed the answer button. "Your Majesty." Rinpoche smiled warmly at the Empress, who was very close to him and could smell the fragrance on her body. After hearing the voice of the man in front of her and the voice that came from the phone, the Empress took the phone and fiddled with it a few times. She then repeated the operation that Rinpoche had just taught her. The Empress went out with a red dress. This time she was wearing a long leather coat with mink fur at the collar. That cold and detached aura of hers became even more intense. It was already the middle of March. Even though it was still a little cold, the sunlight felt very comfortable. The streets in March were much livelier and brighter than in winter. After a harsh winter, everyone could feel the feeling of vitality. Everyone's spirit was much better than in winter. Many people had a relaxed look on their faces. The two of them arrived at the Civil Affairs Department. Rinpoche turned to the Empress and said, "Your Majesty, why don't you wait here for a while? I don't think you will like so many people inside." The Empress shook her head slightly and said, "I will go with you. I also want to see how you do things here." An hour later the two of them walked out. Rinpoche had a temporary identity card in his hand. The name on it was Xiao. Just now, when the Empress went in, the person who handled the identification was immediately stunned as Rinpoche expected. As someone who dealt with all kinds of people all year round, how could he not see that Xiao wasn't an ordinary person? But how could such a person be an unregistered resident? Fortunately, everything was settled smoothly in the end. Now, the Empress could be considered to have settled down on Earth. Chapter 172. Along with the whistling sound, Rinpoche and the Empress felt the pressure from the accelerating plane. The scenery outside the window also proved this point. Looking down through the window, they could see that everything on the ground was getting smaller and smaller until everything on the ground was the size of an ant. The plane began to stabilize and after a while it rose again. "Xiao, are you all right?" Rinpoche looked at Xiao who was sitting by the window and asked. He could see that she was a little nervous. On land, she was the 7th most powerful expert in the world, but in the sky, she felt that everything was out of her control. At this height, even with her skills, she would definitely die if she fell. "Won't I fall?" The Empress frowned as she looked out of the window. "It's safer than driving. There won't be any problems," Rinpoche comforted her softly. "Pa." A soft sound was heard. While Rinpoche was still looking for the source of the sound, he saw that the armrest between them had actually been crushed by the Empress and turned into a pile of fragments. Many people would be nervous during their first time in the air. However, the Empress only used a little more strength and the current situation became like this. Looking at this, Rinpoche was considering whether to make a false accusation that the quality of the armrest was too poor. Seeing that the Empress was still nervous, Rinpoche stretched out his hand and said, "You can hold my hand for a while, but don't crush it." This wasn't a joke, it was the truth. How could his hand not be as hard as the armrest? If his hand was crushed, he would probably have to amputate it. The Empress glanced at him, turned around and continued to look out of the window. Her tightly clenched hand finally loosened, and the fragments fell to the ground. At this moment, both of them were on a plane flying to Yazhou, 3YA. Previously, Rinpoche asked, "Your Majesty, do you want to see the sea?" A few hours later both of them were sitting here. In this season they still had to go to Yazhou to see the sea. The seaside in the north could freeze people to death, and there was nothing much to see in the cold weather. Rinpoche wanted to know if the Empress would wear a swimsuit, but this was just a thought. If he were to raise this thought he would probably be slapped to death. The last time he showed her how to wear a bra, his phone was destroyed. When the plane flew above the clouds, the Empress's eyes widened a little. At this moment, the clouds were like floating continents that reflected the sunlight. It was extremely spectacular and beautiful. A moment later, when the air stewardess passed by, Rinpoche called out to her. He pointed at the armrest with an innocent look on his face and said, "The quality of your armrest is too poor. It breaks when I pinch it." Looking at the two people in front of her, she had an impression of the woman in the red dress. She was too beautiful, full of heroic spirit, and her aura was even more powerful. When she looked at her, she actually felt inferior. Just now in the rear cabin, she had even discussed with the other air stewardesses, wondering what kind of family she came from. She had just heard the first half of Rinpoche's sentence, and she was still thinking about what he meant. However, when the stewardess saw the shattered armrest of the seat, she was clearly surprised. She knew the quality of the seat armrest. How could it be broken with just a pinch? But the truth was right before their eyes. "I'm sorry, sir and this lady." The flight attendant apologized first. Regardless of whether she believed it or not, the armrest was indeed broken. Furthermore, it couldn't have been broken by human hands. It could only be that there was a problem with the armrest that wasn't discovered beforehand. She also didn't mention anything about compensation. After all, this incident had never happened before. She also didn't know how to deal with it. She had to ask the company after the plane landed. However, she assumed that the company wouldn't ask for compensation. After all, the seat armrest on the plane was broken with just a pinch. This was a huge black mark. As long as the other party didn't tell anyone about this incident, the company would be thankful. "It's alright, I'm just informing you to check more next time." Rinpoche smiled politely. After waiting for the stupefied flight attendant to leave, Rinpoche laughed to himself. In the past he had never made such a false accusation. These days he had changed more and more. Is this thing very expensive? The Empress turned around and asked Rinpoche after getting tired of looking at the scenery of the clouds. The plane had really broadened her horizons. Previously she never thought that there would be a time where she could fly above the clouds. According to the legends of Great Xia, that was the residence of the immortals. However, there weren't any immortals in this world. It seemed that it wasn't difficult to fly above the clouds. The monthly salary of the most ordinary citizen can probably afford to fly twice, right? It shouldn't be considered expensive. If it's a long-distance trip, the speed is very fast. It will only take 6 hours to travel more than 3,000 kilometers. The Empress calculated in her heart. The distance from Lan City to Great Xia was about 3,000 kilometers. It would take half a month for a horse carriage to travel and about 4 days for a cavalryman to travel at top speed. In this world it would probably take less than 4 hours to reach Great Xia. This was the power of technology in this world. This was what Dao lacked, a power that far surpassed that of the Yun Nation, the Qin Nation and Great Xia. When the plane arrived in Yenzhou, it was already 10 p.m. Rinpoche felt the hot weather the moment he got off the plane. He took his and the Empress's coats and left the airport. Although it was already late at night, the outside was still brightly lit. Furthermore, the fresh air and the holiday atmosphere made people feel relaxed. They took a taxi to the Sea Charm Hotel, which they had previously booked. It was a luxurious sea-view room with 2 bedrooms and 1 living room. After putting down his things, Rinpoche went to the window of the living room. From here he could hear the sound of the waves and smell the sea. He had long wanted to come here. The Empress came to Rinpoche's side. Although she couldn't see anything, she could still hear the sound of the waves. To her, the sea was something that she had only seen in books. There were only a few descriptions of it. Her deepest impression of the sea was that it could be used to produce salt. If Dao had a sea, they wouldn't have to worry about salt. Subsequently, both of them ordered some dinner before returning to their respective rooms to rest. The next day, Rinpoche woke up early and stood in front of the window to look at the blue sky and white clouds outside. The bright and beautiful weather put him in a good mood. At this time of the day, it was indeed much more comfortable here than in the north. At this moment, standing here and looking outside, there were already people who had woken up early and were taking a stroll on the beach. When he came out of the room, the Empress was already sitting on the sofa and switching on the television. These days she would wake up early to watch the morning news. Every day she would learn a lot of things from it. However, she rarely asked Rinpoche. Most of the things were kept in her heart and would only be asked when she felt it was necessary. Like a sponge, she slowly understood the knowledge of this world. Rinpoche felt that if she really wanted to understand more, it would be better for her to learn the language of this world and use the internet to understand more. It was much more efficient than watching the television. After finishing breakfast, Rinpoche changed his clothes and went out for a stroll with the Empress. The environment of the hotel was pretty good. The greenery in the courtyard was very good, and there was even a swimming pool. The people coming and going were all relaxed tourists. After leaving the hotel and turning a corner, a white beach and azure sea appeared in front of them. Some children were running and playing on the sea. Chapter 173. Rinpoche and the Empress stepped barefoot on the beach and felt the texture of the fine sand beneath their feet. The sound of the waves rang in their ears. Streaks of white lines surged from afar, slapped on the beach and slowly retreated. What do you think of this place? At this moment, Rinpoche even omitted his name. The two of them had already agreed to address each other by name when they were outside. If he were to call her Qi Zixiao, it would be too distant. If he were to call her Zixiao, Rinpoche couldn't bring himself to say it. At the end of the day, he was just an ordinary young man who had never been in love before, and he was a bit of a loner. Even though he had changed a lot these days, he was still somewhat restrained. The Empress turned her head and looked at the azure sea. Then, she looked at the children running around and the wanderers with relaxed smiles on their faces. She said, "It's very peaceful. For ordinary people, this kind of life is very good." Yes. Rinpoche nodded. It was a pity that the people around him were not ordinary people. So the sea is like this. I've thought about it many times in the past, but I can't think of anything, the Empress said again. On Earth, even a child could learn what the ocean looked like through various channels. However, in that world, even the Empress found it hard to imagine things that she had never encountered before. Of course, that world also had its merits. For example, martial techniques, cultivation methods, lifespan extension, and all kinds of treasures were hard to imagine on Earth. In general, Earth was more suitable for ordinary people to live a stable life. Do you want to try? Rinpoche said to the Empress. He took a few steps toward the sea, allowing the seawater to splash on his feet and calves. The Empress hesitated for a moment before taking a few steps forward. She lowered her head and looked at the seawater that was splashing up and submerging her feet. Do you want to take a picture? Rinpoche looked at the Empress, took out his phone and placed it in front of him. The Empress didn't pay attention to him. He minded his own business and took a few pictures of her silhouette. Then he put away his phone. The two of them stood on the beach for a while, then slowly walked back. Hey, be careful. Suddenly, a shout came from the side. Rinpoche turned his head and saw a ball flying in his direction. Furthermore, it was heading straight for the Empress. Not far from him were 6 young foreigners in shorts and t-shirts, with a net in the middle. Quite a few of them had smiles on their faces, but it was unknown if they were doing it on purpose or not. Looking at their expressions, it was very likely that they were doing this on purpose. This was not necessarily malicious. Sometimes they just wanted to see what that person's face looked like. If they hit someone and then ran up to apologize and say a few words, this was considered a small game for them. This kind of thing is not rare. However, the other party had obviously chosen the wrong target this time. The Empress didn't move at all. She raised her hand and gently swatted the incoming volleyball as if she was swatting a fly. At a speed that was much faster than when it came, the ball whizzed back like a cannonball. Boom. A young foreign man who was facing this side was sent flying into the air after his face came into close contact with the volleyball. The young man fell backward, and a line of blood spurted out from his raised face. Even from afar, Rinpoche could feel the pain. I have to say, you guys brought this upon yourselves. The Empress had no intention of stopping at all. Rinpoche quickened his pace and followed beside her. As for those foreigners, he couldn't be bothered. However, he didn't want to bother about them. Instead, they recklessly ran over and blocked their way. The golden-haired, muscular young man in the lead said in clumsy Mandarin, "You guys hit my friend, you have to apologize to him." The 4 of them were taller than the 2 of them, and they were completely looking at the Empress when they said that. When they blocked their way, they were very surprised to see the Empress's face. She was really too stunning. Rinpoche looked at these reckless people and shook his head. Just now, she only used one hand to gently swat the volleyball back. Didn't you see that? You actually dared to come here? Also, did the Empress use the word apologize? Get lost. The Empress didn't care about what they said and only threw out these words coldly. You guys are the ones who threw the ball over. Rinpoche took a step forward and said, Did you guys think that you were hit by a lady? The few of them looked at each other. One of them looked at the Empress and insisted, It was an accident just now, you have to apologize to my friend. The Empress turned her head and looked at Rinpoche. Her expression was indifferent, but her eyes revealed an inquisitive look. Rinpoche subconsciously felt that she wasn't asking him what to do, but whether he could beat her to death. He didn't know why, but he felt that way. Rinpoche didn't know what to say at this moment. However, before he said anything, the Empress had already made her decision. Everyone still didn't know what happened. The young man who spoke just now was immediately sent flying and directly knocked down the person behind him. Rinpoche didn't even notice how she made her move. He only felt that the Empress might have kicked him just now from the movement of her skirt. After the 2 of them left, Rinpoche could still hear the panicked shouts of the few young people behind him. After all, no one saw the stunning lady suddenly make a move, or rather, a kick. They completely didn't know what happened. Zixiao, it's better not to make a move here. After all, your identity is special and you can't be discovered by others. Rinpoche leaned close to the Empress's ear and suddenly said. The sudden address made the Empress stop in her tracks. She turned her head and looked at him. It doesn't matter if they are dead or alive. The key is that if you do that, you will attract the attention of the nation or some people. This is a dangerous thing for you. Even if you aren't afraid, there will still be a lot of trouble. Rinpoche felt a little apprehensive. Just now, he had impulsively called out her name. He didn't know if the Empress would have any reaction. The Empress stared at his face with a pair of cool eyes. After a while, she shifted her gaze away and continued to walk forward. However, her ears were slightly red. Rinpoche directly called her name, causing her heart to beat faster in a peculiar manner. Once again she was at a loss as to what to do. Suddenly she didn't know what to say. Even though she had already chosen this person to be her husband, and she had heard a lot of things from him before. Every time she had this kind of feeling, she would feel a little flustered in her heart. As for the other words, she completely didn't hear them clearly. Only God knew what he said. It was just that the words Zishuan kept reverberating in her ears. Rinpoche had no choice but to follow her again. What he said just now was enough. From the looks of it, the Empress was already very well controlled in this world. In fact, the reason why he said that was because those people just now weren't dangerous. If they could really pose a threat, Rinpoche wouldn't be so pedantic as to not make a move. After all, he had more than one life on his hands. He just didn't want the Empress to expose her uniqueness. He enjoyed the warm life with the Empress on Earth very much and didn't want it to be interrupted. Chapter 174. After leaving the beach, Rinpoche rented a car. Then he went to a supermarket and bought a lot of ingredients for barbecuing and loaded them into the car. Then he drove the Empress on the road aimlessly. The wind blew into the car and messed up the Empress's hair. From time to time, it would brush against Rinpoche's face. The sun, the coast, the road, and aimless travel. Rinpoche felt that this was his dream life. He turned on the multimedia in the car and pressed a few buttons. Immediately, cheerful and lively music started playing in the car. Wear a floral shirt with a ukulele. Otherwise you will look like a gangster brother. Wear a suit with a female companion. Otherwise you will look like a valet. He tapped the steering wheel with one hand and turned to look at the Empress from time to time. When will Dayo become like this? The Empress asked after thinking for a long time. She could feel the joy and satisfaction of everyone here, which was more obvious than in the fast-paced cities. Technology and education are the foundation of everything. The development of society can't be separated from these. Although there are rich and poor people here. The rich are as rich as a country and the poor have difficulty eating. But most ordinary people can meet their basic material needs. They can do this because they have more abundant materials and low prices. The advancement of technology is the prerequisite for achieving these things. For technology to advance, it doesn't require one or two people, but a majority of people to receive education. Commoners don't just farm and hunt, but also contribute to the country. For example, in this world, children start studying at the age of 8 until they are 16 or 17. After high school they go to university, master's and doctorate. The minimum is 9 years, the majority 16 years, and a few even study for more than 20 years. This kind of education allows everyone to have a certain understanding of the world. Every year, there are about 7 million people who graduate from university after 16 years of study. After these people finish their studies, they influence all aspects of society, including the birth of technology. The Empress was surprised again when she heard the number. Dayo had a total population of less than 40 million, and there were 7 million people who completed their 16 years of study here every year. If she hadn't come to this world, it would be hard to believe such a thing. However, after coming to this world twice, she felt that it wasn't a lie. The people around her couldn't possibly lie to her about this. Furthermore, from what he had seen in the past few days, the people of this world were very weak and couldn't be compared to the Aboriginals. However, in terms of speech and perception, they were much better than the Aboriginals. Zixiao, forgive me for speaking bluntly, but Dayo basically doesn't have any basic education. Chapter 175. Both of them sat in the car and listened to a cheerful tune, but they were talking about serious issues. After talking for a long time, both of them fell silent again. The Empress was thinking about Rinpoche's words and the future of Dayo. Previously she didn't feel anything when she was in Dayo. Even though there was a gap between Dayo and the Yun Nation and the Chin Nation, it wasn't that huge. However, in this world she really felt this way. The only thing that the Aboriginals could be proud of was their strong individual strength. According to Rinpoche, the level of civilization was used to represent the two worlds. The difference in civilization between the two worlds was too big. Rinpoche put his hands behind his head and occasionally looked at the side of the Empress's face before looking at the blue sky and white clouds outside. After a long time Rinpoche said, "Shall we roast the meat here? I will go down and prepare first." This was near a beach. The quality of the sand wasn't very good, and there were many reefs around. However, it had a different flavor compared to the calm beach. Rinpoche first found a good place to start a fire with the stove and charcoal. Then he went back to the car to get the marinated meat. After a while, the Empress and Rinpoche sat on the beach with the sea beside them. Each of them sat on a small stool. It couldn't be compared to those high-end restaurants, but it was very comfortable. From time to time, Rinpoche placed the roasted meat on a plate and placed it beside the Empress. No matter how high-end that kind of place is, it can't compare to the palace. The life of ordinary people is more interesting. Ordinary people are bragging, but your majesty, you are experiencing life. Rinpoche chattered from time to time and didn't care whether the empress replied or not. After roasting the meat, the empress drank a whole bottle of white wine, but her eyes were still clear. Do you know that the earth is round? Earth is just a planet in this boundless universe. There are countless planets like Earth. There are all kinds of intelligent life on it, such as the Autobots, Decepticons, Ultraman and Super Saiyan's. Rinpoche began to ramble after drinking half a bottle of white wine. In order to increase his persuasiveness, Rinpoche specially used his cell phone to find a video of Transformers for the Empress to watch. Looking at the battle between the giant transformable robot and the humans, the Empress was stunned. The Empress stared at the screen and subconsciously thought about what she would do if she encountered such an enemy. Although the other party was huge, had a steel body and had all kinds of weapons, it wouldn't be a problem for her. However, it was unknown how many ordinary aboriginals it would take to kill him. Rinpoche watched as the Empress pondered seriously. He found it more and more interesting, and the smile on his face widened. Chapter 176. In the cold and quiet Yangshin Palace Hall, two silhouettes suddenly appeared out of thin air. Rinpoche was holding a huge cardboard box and a small bag in his hands. After taking a good look at the surroundings, he lowered his head and looked at the Empress's hands. It was empty. It was in my hands just now, but it disappeared in an instant, the Empress said as she looked at her left hand. After the second medicinal bath, Rinpoche's current strength was about 150 kilograms. The box in his hands and the Empress's strength were about the same. He originally wanted to see if the Empress could bring some with her, but it was proven that it was impossible. The items had disappeared. He didn't know if they were left on Earth or disappeared somewhere during the transmigration. Your Majesty. Qing Yuan and Hong Wan's voices sounded behind them. The Empress retracted her hand as if she had been electrocuted. What time is it now? The Empress turned around and asked. Your Majesty, it's midnight. The two of them walked to the Empress and said after bowing. From the looks of it, the two of them had been guarding the Empress since she left. It was between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the morning, which was exactly midnight. Did anything happen in the palace? The Empress asked again. Everything is safe. The two of you can leave first, the Empress waved her hand. After the two of them left, she looked at the box in Rinpoche's hands and asked, What's that? Rinpoche asked someone to lock the box in his room before the two of them returned. She didn't have the time to ask. It's a device that uses sunlight to melt steel. It's for demonstration purposes. I'm going to make glass and mirrors and a bigger piece of equipment to melt Mount Damo bit by bit. I thought that there might be some criticism if I build a factory to make glass, so I prepared this. I'm sure the others won't have anything to say about it, Rinpoche said as he patted the box. This was a demonstration of the solar furnace as well as his ability. He was well aware of his current situation. Feng Ho's attitude at the throne room and Tao Jiyuan's attitude at the start were enough to tell him a lot about his current situation. Even if he put himself in his shoes, he would come to the same conclusion. Therefore, he wanted to show some things to others. Once his ability was recognized by everyone, it would be much more convenient for him to do various things in the future. After all, he didn't like to be doubted. Okay. The Empress nodded her head, turned around and returned to the couch. Let me know when you're ready tomorrow. I'll let Second Elder and a few others watch. Yes. In that case I shall return first. Rinpoche carried the box and walked out carefully. When he was outside, he found two guards to help him send it back to Pingle Park. After returning to Pingle Park, Rinpoche first practiced Rui visualization before falling asleep on his bed. The next morning, when Rinpoche saw that the sun was already up, he instructed the imperial bodyguards to move the box to an open space in Pingle Park. In any case, the demonstration only needed an open space that didn't block the sun. Rinpoche opened the box and revealed a metal plate that was shaped like a pot lid. It was about a meter in diameter and had a grid on it. There were two other boxes in the box, and inside them were neatly arranged small lenses. It was said that there were 2,000 yuan in total. It had to be said that this job was quite troublesome. The clumsy aboriginal guards couldn't help much, and he was afraid that they would destroy the metal plate if they used too much force. As such, he had no choice but to do it himself. It took him more than 2 hours to install the lenses, and his arms were sore. The two guards didn't leave either. They watched Rinpoche from afar and were curious about what he was doing. Occasionally, when they saw those small lenses, they subconsciously felt that they were very precious. Come, help me hold this, Rinpoche said to the two guards and went to find a tree branch. Point this toward the sun at this angle, Rinpoche instructed the guard. The disc was sparkling like a treasure, and the other guards subconsciously wanted to get closer to take a look. Don't get close, stand to the side. Rinpoche was shocked by the guard's action. The focal point of the reflection of the sunlight from this disc could directly melt steel, let alone a person. All right, hold it and don't move. Rinpoche instructed the guard to stand properly while he extended the tree branch to a position that was 1.5 meters away from the center of the disc. When the tree branch reached the focal point, it instantly emitted smoke and then caught on fire. This scene caused the two guards to stare blankly. What kind of treasure was this round plate? Rinpoche went back to his room and found a small copper ring. He put it on the tree branch and extended it toward the focal point. The tree branch instantly ignited, and in less than 7 or 8 seconds the copper ring began to melt. Finally, only half of it remained on the ground. The sun in this world was slightly bigger and hotter than on Earth. As a result, the speed at which the metal melted was faster. Deputy Prefect, what kind of treasure is this? The two guards were speechless and finally couldn't help but ask. Rinpoche smiled and didn't answer. He said, "Go and inform Her Majesty." "Forget it, I will go myself." He asked someone to put the disc back into the box and placed it in the house. Then he excitedly ran to Yangxin Palace Hall to look for the Empress. "Your Majesty, I am done. I have tried it just now and there are no problems," Rinpoche said with a smile on his face. "Oh, I would like to see what exactly you have made." Everyone walked in the palace for a while and finally arrived at the entrance of Pingle Park. When the guards at the entrance saw the Empress, they quickly greeted her. The others also knew where they were. Even if he hadn't been here before, he could guess the identity of the person living here just by looking at the courtyard. At this time there was probably only one person living here. Why did His Majesty bring us here? Everyone thought to themselves. Rinpoche was in a daze in the courtyard. When he saw the Empress and the rest arrive at the entrance, he quickly greeted them. He had basically seen the people behind the Empress before. Even if he didn't know their positions, he could roughly guess their positions after hearing the Empress's orders and looking at their uniforms. "Deputy Prefect Rin, show us what it looks like," the Empress said. After Rinpoche acknowledged the order, he took out the round plate that was covered with pieces of mirrors from the box at the corner of the wall. He called the guard who had started the test and took out a few pairs of sunglasses from the box. He handed one of them to the Empress and the rest to everyone else. "Your Majesty, it's better to wear sunglasses so that it won't dazzle your eyes." Everyone took it and studied it carefully. They saw that it was surrounded by a frame and there were two black transparent things that looked like polished gems. For a moment they couldn't figure out what it was used for. When the Empress was on Earth, especially in Yezhou, she often saw people wearing sunglasses. After fiddling with it for a while, she put it on. Everyone then came to a realization and followed suit. When looking at things with sunglasses, the light immediately dimmed. The surrounding light wasn't as strong, but it also made people feel a little cooler. One after another, they let out a soft cry of surprise. As usual, Rinpoche first took a tree branch and placed it on the focal point. In an instant, it began to emit smoke and then catch on fire. Everyone saw him place the tree branch in front of that thing and it caught on fire instantly. At that time, they were like the two guards and thought that it was some kind of treasure. Could it be that anything that was shown on would catch on fire? For a moment, everyone's imagination ran wild. "Lend me your saber," Rinpoche said to the guard. Immediately, the guard had a constipated expression on his face. This saber was his livelihood. He absolutely believed that his saber would break if he placed it on the pillar. "I will compensate you later." Rinpoche laughed. Although a small metal piece could also be used, the visual impact of using a saber would be stronger. That guard handed the saber over with a sullen face. Rinpoche placed the saber on the focal point. In less than 10 seconds the wound began to emit smoke. Following which, a red dot began to appear in the middle of the saber. Subsequently, it slowly expanded. Molten iron flowed along the saber and dripped onto the ground. A circular hole appeared in the middle of the saber. Hiss. Everyone took in a breath of cold air. The scene of the saber melting was indeed a huge visual impact. It was much more impactful than the impact of the tree branch burning. One had to know that even smelting iron ore required a lot of effort. However, this thing actually melted a hole in the saber in such a short period of time. Its power could be said to be very terrifying. "Congratulations on obtaining this treasure, Your Majesty. May I know where you obtained this treasure?" Shi Qing immediately said. In his heart, he felt that the Empress wouldn't call everyone over just to let them admire the treasure. Your Majesty, are you preparing to use this treasure at Mount Damo? On the contrary, Feng Ho's eyes lit up. After all, he was the clearest about what happened at Mount Damo. Now that they had this treasure, the mining speed at Mount Damo would increase significantly. Upon hearing what he said, everyone else also felt that the Empress had called them over for this matter. With this treasure, the mining speed at Mount Damo would increase significantly. Deputy Prefect Ren, please explain. The Empress opened her mouth and said. Ren Baqin asked the guard to put down the disc. He took out 2 mirrors from it and held them in his hands. Actually, these are just mirrors. Everyone knows that mirrors can reflect light, and light has energy. You can think of light as having heat. Therefore, when the sun shines on your body, it will definitely be hotter than when you are in a room. And mirrors make use of this point. According to a certain angle, the reflected light from many mirrors can be focused on a single point. This can instantly cause that point to have an extremely high temperature. This is what you see as the instantaneous melting of iron. Are you saying that this treasure is made from these kinds of mirrors? Everyone looked at the mirrors in Ren Baqin's hands curiously. This kind of mirror was given to the Empress by Ren Baqin, right? It was just a little small, but it could reflect people so clearly without any blur. It could be considered a good thing. Another person went forward to look at the solar furnace. However, after Ren Baqin's demonstration, no one dared to go near the solar furnace. Even the steel knives were melted within a few seconds. If it shone on a person, the consequences would be terrifying. Yes, all of them are mirrors. I call this a solar furnace. It completely utilizes the energy of the sun to create an extremely high temperature. Furthermore, I intend to build a few larger solar furnaces and place them on Mount Damo. After melting and mining, we can increase the output of Mount Damo's iron ore by 100 times in a short period of time. 100 times. You said that it can increase the output by 100 times? Feng Ho stared at Ren Baqin with a blank look. As long as you can do it, the entire Ministry of Works will be at your disposal, Tu-Wan said solemnly. The Ministry of Revenue is the same. Minister of Revenue Tu-Wan was a woman who looked a bit older than Imperial Treasurer Guyu, but she was very charming. At this moment, everyone knew why His Majesty had summoned them. On one hand, he wanted to observe this treasure, and at the same time, he wanted the cooperation of the various departments in the construction of this glass factory. On the other hand, he wanted the support of the various departments. Money and manpower were definitely needed. However, in order to get a slice of the pie that Ren Baqin had laid out for them, none of them would object if he asked them to put in the effort. There's no need to trouble everyone. This glass factory is considered an industry of the palace. Naturally, the palace will allocate funds to build it, Ren Baqin said on behalf of the Empress. Everyone was shocked and didn't know what he meant. Soon after, they became pensive. For example, the royal families of Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Qin nation all had industries. However, Daya was poor. Regardless of whether it was the previous emperor or the empress, they had very low requirements for material goods and weren't extravagant. In addition, they didn't put much effort into this, so the royal family didn't have any industries. Needless to say, this was definitely Ren Baqin's idea. The empress wouldn't do this. I will also make arrangements for the solar furnace on Mount Damo. You don't need to do anything, but I will need some craftsmen to build it. At the same time, I will recruit some skilled aboriginals. They must be skilled. Upon hearing this, Tong Jinye, the Minister of Works, didn't object. Needless to say, Ren Baqin wanted to increase the mining speed of Mount Damo by 100 times. Even if it was 10 times, the Ministry of Works would support whatever manpower he needed. Increasing the mining speed was already the biggest benefit for the Ministry of Works. Tu-Wan frowned slightly. She had more ideas about what this glass factory could do, but after thinking about it, she felt relieved. After all, this matter was proposed by Deputy Prefect Ren, who was also the husband chosen by the Empress. If he wanted to use the power of the palace to do this, the others couldn't say anything. Because by doing this, this glass factory would become the Empress's industry in the future. Would she still be able to snatch things from the Empress? As such, no one had any objections. Let's do it then. Seeing that no one spoke, the Empress made the final decision. Yes, Your Majesty, everyone replied. Originally, everyone didn't think much of Ren Baqin. After this incident, they somewhat looked up to him. After all, to be able to produce such a thing, it was evident that he was capable. Unfortunately, he was still too weak. He could be strangled to death with one hand. He wasn't worthy of the Empress. Work on the glass factory will start tomorrow. Deputy Prefect Ren will be in charge and the other departments will do their best to assist. Yes. At this point, the matter had been completely settled. Everyone's trip to the palace wasn't in vain. At least they were able to see such a magical thing, which was an eye-opener for them. They conveniently took the sunglasses away. This group of people didn't think of returning them. After nodding at Ren Baqin, they put on the sunglasses and left immediately. They were afraid that Ren Baqin would ask for them back. In their hearts, these sunglasses were still good stuff. After all, they didn't know much about glass. This mirror should be made of gemstones and the workmanship was exquisite. It would be good to take it as a family heirloom. Naturally, they wouldn't know that these sunglasses were bought by Ren Baqin at the roadside for 30 yuan each. If he wanted, he could bring a sack of them back anytime. Before everyone left, they nodded at Ren Baqin. This showed that these big shots in the imperial court had more or less acknowledged him. This was a good thing. In the evening, he went to Yangxin Palace Hall and chatted with the Empress for a while. He told her about the things needed for the construction of this glass factory. Even though he made it sound simple in the afternoon, there were still a lot of things to do. For example, a blast furnace was needed for both steel making and glass production. Since they were going to use a blast furnace, they would need cement and baked bricks. Also, the materials needed for glass production: sandstone, soda ash, feldspar, dolomite, limestone, mirabilite and so on. Most of these materials needed to be found within the borders of Dayo. Of course, he didn't need to look for them personally. He just needed to bring back a few pieces from Earth for the people of Dayo to find. However, he still needed to make the soda ash. As a result, even though it was just a glass factory, there were a lot of things that needed to be built. Among them, Ren Baqin was going to provide the cement and baked bricks to the Ministry of Works. There was no need for him to hide this technology. Even if it was glass, after a period of time, after he had earned the most profit, he was going to sell this technology. Among them, cement could be used in the construction of cities, roads, and other aspects. There were also many uses for baked bricks. For example, in the future he wanted to smelt in a blast furnace or build houses for the commoners. He didn't need to grind such big stones and transport them back to the city anymore. Furthermore, brick houses were much better at keeping warm, waterproof, anti-corrosion, and fireproofing than wooden buildings. Chapter 179. Early the next morning, Ren Baqin took the palace gate token and went out with 2 guards and a few crooked cows. After all, with Ren Baqin's strength, no one would be at ease if he went out alone. Even he himself was worried. The Empress transferred 2 guards from the palace to him. These 2 guards were much stronger than the original Teng Hulu and Tai Dao. Teng Hulu and Tai Dao had just attained the 4-way heaven level and were equivalent to the initial man-wheel level. Even the weakest person in Dayo's army could reach this level. The 2 guards that the Empress transferred to Ren Baqin were at the initial Kismet heaven level, which was equivalent to the initial Earthwheel level. They were slightly stronger than the initial Earthwheel experts from the other 3 nations. Walking out of the palace, Ren Baqin opened his arms wide. He hadn't been out for some time. It felt better to be outside as the palace was too quiet. Riding on the crooked cow, Ren Baqin traveled in the middle of the road. Behind him were 2 other guards who were also riding crooked cows. They headed straight for the Ministry of Works. The roads in Lan City were very wide. The middle was for mounts and carriages. Pedestrians were on both sides of the road. When they saw the 3 people riding over, they focused their attention and whispered to each other. "Is that the husband chosen by Her Majesty? He looks like he is wearing an official uniform. It must be him. There is no other person like him in Lan City. I don't know what Her Majesty sees in him." However, there was one person in the crowd who left in a hurry after seeing Ren Baqin and didn't attract anyone's attention. Such comments even drifted into Ren Baqin's ears. Even though the aboriginals were whispering, their voices were similar to ordinary people's. This made him wonder if the aboriginals had hearing problems. Ren Baqin couldn't be bothered to pay attention to such comments. After a long time, such comments would naturally decrease. There were many people going in and out of the Ministry of Works. It was much livelier than the Honglu Bureau. After all, the Ministry of Works was in charge of a lot of things. It wasn't something a small yamen like the Honglu Bureau could compare to. Ren Baqin reported his name and was let in. However, Tong Jingya wasn't there. Ren Baqin waited for more than an hour. He was wearing sunglasses and his nose was almost pointing to the sky. Coupled with his burly physique, bald head and twisted beard, Ren Baqin felt that he was only missing a gold chain. Deputy Prefect Ren, what do you want me to do? Tong Xinye brought Ren Baqin into a room and asked bluntly. Lord Tong, if you want to make glass you must first make a blast furnace. Not only does the glass factory need it, but the Ministry of Works also needs it for metal smelting. By using a blast furnace, the speed of smelting is several times faster than in the past. The two of us haven't caused any trouble these few days? The two of them asked doubtfully. Cut the crap, Tong Xinye scolded. Deputy Prefect Ren, ask away. Have the two of you seen that kind of limestone or cloud rock before? It's... Ren Baqin described a few types of limestone to the two of them. Aren't these things everywhere? The two burly men scratched their heads. Where's the nearest one? Walk in that direction for half a day and you will find it everywhere. One of them looked around for a long time before pointing in the right direction and saying. That direction was northeast of Lan City. Sir Tong, I'm afraid I'll have to borrow these two from you for a while. Ren Baqin turned his head and cupped his hands. From today onwards, the two of you will listen to Sir Ren's instructions. If you make any mistakes, you will be punished, Tong Xinye said to the two of them with his eyes wide open. Yes, sir. The two of them shrunk their necks. I'll have to trouble the two of you to make a trip and bring some back for me to take a look. If it's what I want, it would be the best. If it's not, I'm afraid I'll have to make a few more trips. In addition, there are a few other things that we need. We need feldspar and dolomite. If the two of you know where to find them, you can arrange for someone to bring them back. However, the limestone is of utmost importance, Ren Baqin continued. At the same time, he told them about the characteristics of feldspar and dolomite. That dolomite can be found outside the city for half a day, but it's not in the same direction as before. As for feldspar, there are a few places that might have it, but the two of us can't remember. The two of them pondered for a while and said, well, I'll have to trouble the two of you to search for it. Also, have the two of you seen a kind of black stone that can burn? I'm not sure about that. In that case, I'll have to trouble the two of you to bring back some of the aforementioned items. After the two of them left, Tong Xinye opened his mouth and said, I know about the black stone that can burn. Those people in the south often burn it. Initially, I was curious that it can also be burned. Sir Ren, can't we just use wood to burn it? It's all over the mountain. Ren Baqin was delighted to hear Tong Xinye's words. That thing is much more useful than wood. Furthermore, its temperature is higher than wood. That's a good thing. Chapter 180. Ren Baqin had to admit that the minerals that he was looking for were very common. They were widely distributed and could be easily found in this world. Tai Zhe and Tai Quan had solved most of his problems when they first arrived at the Ministry of Works. After the two of them left, Ren Baqin repeatedly exhorted them to excavate the coal. Not only was the coal resistant, but it was also relatively hot. Whether it was used to bake bricks, make glass, or smelt iron, or it was extremely useful. The only problem was that it was too far away. According to Tong Xinye, it would take 10 days to travel by car. Transporting it this way would consume too much manpower and resources. It would be great if they could find the coal within a short distance. After chatting with Tong Xinye for a while, Ren Baqin bade farewell. He only had to wait for the two of them to come back and confirm that it was limestone. After that, he could start mining. Let's go to the Beast Park, Ren Baqin said to the two guards after leaving the Ministry of Works. He had not seen the two little fellows for some time and missed them a little. Secondly, the sweet potatoes should be ripe soon. It was time to go and take a look. As for the small amount of money that he earned from his partnership with Caretaker Shi, he no longer cared about it. To put it in a pretentious way, money was really not of much use to him now. Not far from the Ministry of Works, Ren Baqin had just turned a corner when four people suddenly appeared on top of the wall. They were holding something in their hands and aiming at Ren Baqin. Sir, be careful. When the two guards behind saw this scene, their expressions changed and they immediately shouted. One of them even pounced on Ren Baqin and pushed him off the back of the crooked cow. At the same time there was a buzzing sound. Countless cold lights shot towards Ren Baqin from both sides. They almost enveloped him from all directions. Before Ren Baqin could react, he felt himself being knocked away by a strong force. Following that, he felt a sharp pain in several parts of his body. As for the guard he knocked away, his entire body was like a sieve as he fell straight to the ground. At this moment, Ren Baqin was also lying on the ground. His whole body was in pain and he was completely dumbfounded. He did not expect to be assassinated. If that guard had moved a little slower, he would have become a sieve. He almost died? This sudden realization caused him to lose his composure for a moment. Following that, he felt immense fear and anger. However, the pain in his body made him unable to move. At this time there was a sharp pain coming from his legs, back and waist. This kind of pain made him think that he would die in the next second. Soon he blacked out. The other guard's eyes turned red. He roared and stood in front of Rinpoche. "Men, there's an assassination." The imperial bodyguard roared. Naturally, he could see the strength of these people. They hadn't even reached the earth wheel level. In a short while he would be able to kill them all. However, if someone were to make use of this opportunity to attack Deputy Prefect Ren would be dead meat. The 4 people on top of the wall glanced at Rinpoche, who was lying on the ground, and all of them rushed toward him. The 4 of them knew that it was impossible for them to leave Lan City alive. Ever since they received this mission, they had been prepared to die. Although Rinpoche had already been shot a few times, he couldn't leave anyway. He might as well go up and stab the target a few more times to confirm that the target was dead. Poof! The long sword in the guard's hand turned into a streak of snow-white light and chopped the person in front into 2. The other 3 people continued to pounce forward as if they didn't notice. Clang! The guard deflected the sword in one of the people's hands and kicked him to the wall. Following which, he chopped off the head of another person. However, the sword in the hand of the last person, who was also the most powerful person, wasn't aimed at Rinpoche. Instead, it went straight for the chest of this guard at lightning speed. Just as the guard was chopping off the head of that person, he stabbed his sword into his chest. That guard spurted out blood from his mouth and his eyes were wide open. He threw away his long sword and grabbed his opponent. His hands were like iron pincers. No matter how the other party struggled, he couldn't free himself. Following which, he ferociously slammed his head into the other party's skull, followed by a second and a third time. After a few slams, half of that person's head was left. Brain juice and blood spurted everywhere. Following which, he casually threw the corpse to one side. However, the sword in his chest didn't move at all. He knew that if he pulled out the sword, he would die even faster. Within a minute, someone rushed to the scene and saw the scene of blood flowing all over the ground. Of the 2 guards, one was riddled with holes while the other stood there with a sword in his chest. There was also Deputy Prefect Ren lying on the ground covered in blood. There were also a few corpses scattered around. Such a scene actually made the person who came to Lan City extremely angry. There was actually someone who dared to assassinate a high-ranking official of the imperial court. Moreover, it was the one with the most special status. However, it was better to quickly check on Rinpoche's injuries. Both of his legs were pierced through, one side of his waist was pierced through from the front to the back, and there was a bloody groove on his back. However, he was still breathing and his injuries weren't fatal for a short period of time. As for that guard, he was fine for the time being. However, it was hard to say if he was delayed for a while longer. After a while, Rinpoche was carried by someone and sent to the clinic. Tong Jinye had a fierce look on his face. "Do you know who he is? He must be treated no matter what. If he dies, all of you will die too." One had to know that Rinpoche was involved in a lot of things. He was the husband of the Empress, the iron mine at Mount Damo, better smelting technology, and the cement that he mentioned. No matter what, he couldn't die. How could the doctor at the clinic not know Tong Jinye? Looking at the young man and the official robe that he was wearing, he immediately guessed his identity. After all, there was only one foreigner who was an official in Dayo. After the time it took to burn half an incense stick, there was a boom sound in Yangxin Palace Hall. The entire wooden couch was shattered into pieces. The Empress's face was frosty. In a flash, she appeared outside Yangxin Palace Hall. She soared into the sky and went straight to the clinic. Tong Jinye was looking at the doctor treating Rinpoche's wounds. Not far away from him was the Imperial Guard. Suddenly, he felt a terrifying aura moving rapidly in his direction. This aura was too familiar. He experienced it a few times a month. He went to the courtyard and waited for the arrival of that person. "Greetings, Your Majesty." As a red shadow appeared in the clinic, Tong Jinye lowered his head and greeted. In the next second, his entire body flew out and smashed through 3 walls. Not only was he smashed out of the Imperial Physician's office, but he also flew into a magistrate's office at the side and crashed into another building. The loud noise and the flying stones caused a commotion. In an instant, 7 or 8 people appeared in that courtyard. One had to know that this was the Ministry of War. How dare someone be so presumptuous here? There were even people who jumped on top of the wall to see who was so presumptuous. At this moment, there was a group of people standing in the courtyard of the clinic. All of them were as quiet as cicadas in winter. Before they could speak, Tong Jinye walked out of the half-destroyed building with a distressed look on his face and one hand on his waist. Sir Tong, what's the meaning of this? Qin Shan, the Minister of War, asked with an unfriendly look. Tong Xinye was also angry. Who did he offend? Her Majesty is over there. Tong Xinye's next sentence made the Minister of War, who was eager to get into action, immediately wilt. What happened? Qin Chuan frowned and asked. Even if Her Majesty wasn't happy, she wouldn't do such a thing. Ren Baqin, Deputy Prefect Ren, was just assassinated, Tong Xinye said unhappily. Qin Chuan didn't have any dealings with Ren Baqin. After thinking for a while, he remembered who Ren Baqin was. Chapter 181. Qin Chuan waved his hands and said, "What are you all doing here? Are you itching for a beating? Go back and do whatever you need to do." Immediately, everyone from the Ministry of War dispersed. The Empress was just next door and was obviously on the verge of flying into a rage. At this moment, no one was willing to provoke her and all of them hid as far as they could. In fact, when the Empress came over, she wasn't just one or two people. Along the way, many people were apprehensive about what had happened to make the Empress so furious and hurriedly followed behind her. However, when they saw Tong Xinye being beaten up so badly, they immediately hid as far as they could. Only Qin Chuan, who had a poor sense of aura, didn't notice the Empress. When Tong Xinye returned to the courtyard, there was a group of trembling doctors and apprentices from the clinic. There were also some people standing on the walls or rooftops watching from afar. They were all high-ranking officials from various departments. Tell me, how did this happen? The Empress stood in front of the door of the clinic. The surrounding aura plummeted and the air seemed to be frozen. Everyone could feel the bone-piercing chill. Just now, the Empress had already gone in to take a look. The most serious injury on Ren Baqin's body was penetrated through his waist. Even though he wouldn't die for the time being, there was a very troublesome matter, and that was the poison on the crossbow arrow. Even though the poison wasn't immediately fatal, it was more troublesome than that. This made her even more furious. If she knew who did it, even if it was in Great Xia's palace, she would immediately kill them. Your Majesty, Deputy Prefect Ren was assassinated when he was about 200 steps away from the Ministry of Works. It was obvious that the other party was well prepared and used repeating crossbows. Their target was Deputy Prefect Ren. When I heard the guards' shouts and rushed over immediately, it was already over. Of the two guards, one died on the spot and the other was seriously injured. Tong Xinye described the scene. In fact, he didn't know much, but he was the fastest and arrived at the scene just in time. In the end, he became the punching bag and could only laugh bitterly. Your Majesty, Sir Ren is fine for the time being and his wounds are all fine. However, the poison on the crossbow arrow is still in his body. Even though nothing can be seen on the surface, it has been corroding his body. Without the antidote, I'm afraid he will become a cripple in half a month. Even though he is conscious, he won't be able to move. By that time, the antidote won't be of much use. A spirited old man walked out from the room and said to the Empress. What poison? The Empress asked coldly. The name of the 9 pavilions half-death is half-death, derived from the meaning of half-dead. Those who are poisoned by this poison can neither die nor live even if they wanted to. They are definitely not from the Qin nation, one of them said as he searched the 4 people's bodies. Even though the people from the Qin nation look about the same, their skin is thicker. After all, the wind there is strong. It might be possible for other people to have thin skin, but these people are obviously death warriors trained by big clans. They can't be practicing martial arts in their rooms every day, right? That person turned around and said, "Continue to investigate. How long have these people been in Dayo? Where do they live and who do they have contact with? Don't let any of them go," that burly man said loudly. Just now, he sensed that the terrifying aura was heading to the clinic. It had only been slightly more than 30 minutes since the incident happened. The Empress actually rushed over after receiving the news. This showed how much importance she attached to this matter. At the same time, the aura that the Empress emitted just now let everyone know that she was furious. Under such circumstances, no one dared to slack off. If they didn't know anything when the Empress asked them later, they would be the unlucky ones. However, the Empress wasn't paying attention to this at this moment. It would take about 10 days to reach the 9 pavilions from here. According to what the old man said just now, Ren Baqin could hold on for at most half a month. After this time, even if they had the antidote, it would be useless. Therefore, it was impossible to send someone to the 9 pavilions to ask for the antidote. Not to mention whether or not they could get the antidote, there wasn't enough time. They had to send someone to send Ren Baqin over. Furthermore, that person had to be strong enough to get the antidote from the 9 pavilions. In Dao there were only two people who could do all this: Ren Baqin and Hong Wu. Hong Wu was guarding the border. If Ren Baqin appeared in Dao, one could imagine the commotion it would cause. He was afraid that the imperial family of Great Xia wouldn't just watch him go around Great Xia before returning to Dao. But did he want to watch him die? Chapter 182. Ren Baqin was naked. At this point in time, there were only faint scars left on his body. The doctor's office had prepared medicine like the black mud cream, and his wounds would heal in a short period of time. However, his eyes were still tightly shut, his face was pale, and he was completely unconscious. The Empress stood in front of him for a long time with a complicated look on her face. Not to mention the changes that Ren Baqin could bring to Dao from what the Empress had seen, he was the only person that she had a good impression of for so many years, and she couldn't just watch him die like this. However, if she were to leave Dao for Great Xia, she was afraid that it would be extremely risky. If she were to go to the 9 pavilions, the risk wouldn't be too high. If there was a conflict, she was afraid that other people would immediately know about it. At that time, it would be difficult for her to leave Great Xia. From the way the 9 pavilions had always handled things, the possibility of a conflict was very high. If it was a normal person, it could still be negotiated. However, it was really unknown what those lunatics in the 9 pavilions would do. At this moment, the Empress was in such a dilemma. After a while, the Empress sighed softly and the coldness on her face dissipated a lot. She lifted the bed with one hand and wrapped Ren Baqin up with the cloth on the bed. Following which, she carried Ren Baqin with one hand and broke through the door, transforming into a red shadow as she headed for the palace. After the Empress left, everyone in the doctor's office heaved a sigh of relief. Many of them directly sat on the ground and no one around them laughed at him. Just now the Empress gave them a terrifying feeling. She was like a volcano that could erupt at any time, making it hard for them to breathe. Tong Jingye looked at the direction where the Empress disappeared, turned around and asked that old man, "Is there no other way? This kind of poison is extremely rare. Besides the people in the 9 pavilions, no one knows the formula. Naturally, there's no way to detoxify it." That old man shook his head. Tong Jingye also sighed. It would have been fine even if he had to wait for Deputy Prefect Ren to build those things that he mentioned. Yet, it gave him hope, and then it came to an abrupt end. He didn't doubt this old man's words at all. Previously, the Empress didn't have the slightest doubt either. If he said there was no other way, then there was definitely no other way. There were still a few old freaks in the imperial court of Dao. This old man was one of them. The old woman in Qingxin Palace Hall was also one of them. They were called old freaks not only because they were old enough. What about the guard? Tong Jingye asked again. His injuries are very serious. He almost lost his life. He needs to recuperate for a few days, the old man said. Tong Jingye nodded, then shook his head. What a pity. It was a pity for Ren Baqin. If it was before, he naturally wouldn't have taken a liking to it. However, after Ren Baqin showed him those things, he changed his mind. No matter what, Deputy Prefect Ren's capability in these aspects was admirable. In the future he would cultivate diligently. Even though he was still lacking compared to Her Majesty, he would still be able to accept it. What a pity. Tong Jingye exerted force on his feet and directly landed on a house in the distance. After a few flashes, he disappeared without a trace. The Empress brought Ren Baqin back to the palace and went straight to Yangxin Palace Hall. With a wave of her arm, Ren Baqin landed on the couch. "Get some clothes from Pingle Park for him to change into," the Empress said coldly. "Yes, Your Majesty," the two of them answered, and Qing Yuan hurried out. "Help me tie up my hair," the Empress said as she sat in front of the mirror. In the mirror, there was an indifferent and heroic-looking lady. After Hong Yuan had tied up her hair, she used her hands to trace the words on both sides of the mirror before turning around to look. At this moment, Qing Yuan was helping Ren Baqin put on his clothes with a red face. After a long time, she finally helped him put on his clothes. The Empress walked a few steps in this hall and looked around. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan felt that Her Majesty was giving off a strange vibe, but they couldn't tell why. Thinking about it, it might be because of the assassination attempt on Deputy Prefect Ren. They didn't know who was so daring and whether or not the culprit was caught. Fortunately, Deputy Prefect Ren was fine. Even though he hadn't woken up and his face was a little pale, his chest was heaving up and down. Presumably he would wake up soon. Otherwise, Her Majesty would definitely be angry. Even if they didn't talk about Her Majesty, they had only seen Her Majesty treat one person like this for so many years. They didn't want Her Majesty to be sad if anything happened to him. Just as the two of them were having wild thoughts, The Empress suddenly said, "Tell Shi Qing if I die, please invite that person back. Jikohai has been thinking about him for so many years. All along, I didn't kill him because I felt that this day might come." After hearing the Empress's words, Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were immediately stunned. They couldn't conceal the shock on their faces and cried out involuntarily, "Your Majesty! It's just a precaution. There isn't anyone in this world who can make me stay." The Empress raised her voice and said with a domineering tone that looked down on the world. However, when the two of them heard these words, they panicked and asked, "Your Majesty, what are you going to do?" "I'm going out for a walk. Tell the Public Order Bureau and the Department of Inspection to investigate. As long as they find someone related, they don't need any evidence. Kill them all. Don't leave anyone alive." While speaking, the Empress appeared beside the bed and lifted Rinpoche with one hand. When she finished her last word, she had already disappeared from the hall, leaving only the words, "Don't leave anyone alive," echoing in the hall. "Your Majesty!" Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan shouted loudly. Soon after, they hurriedly ran out of the palace gate, but they couldn't find the Empress. "Quick, call General Xianger over. Something happened to Her Majesty," the two of them shouted in panic. The Empress carried Rinpoche and went straight to a corner of the palace. After a few flashes, she landed in a courtyard. There was a huge pond in this courtyard. A monster with the head of a lion, antlers of a deer, the eyes of a tiger, the body of a moose, dragon scales, and the tail of an ox was lying in the pond. It was the Kirin that Rinpoche had seen before. When it sensed the Empress coming in, it immediately stood up and let out a howl at her. Not only was it not scary, but it was also very intimate, as if it was greeting her. The Empress flipped over and stood on its back. She said coldly, "Let's go to the north." Howl. This time around, the Kirin's howl wasn't as obedient as before. Instead, it was filled with deterrence. Its eyes revealed an excited look as it soared into the sky and landed on the roof of a nearby house. Then, it leaped forward and crossed 5 or 6 courtyards before landing on the roof of another house. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" Everyone in the palace was alarmed by the Kirin's howl. Soon after, they saw the Kirin running out of the courtyard. When they saw the red figure standing on its back, they immediately cried out in alarm. Her Majesty actually rode a Kirin out of the palace? Upon seeing this scene, more than a dozen figures immediately leaped up from the palace and hurriedly chased after it. However, before they could go far, the Kirin had already disappeared beyond the palace walls. Xianger's face turned ugly. Her Majesty usually wouldn't ride a Kirin out of the palace. From the looks of it, she was going somewhere far away. As the commander of the palace guards, she actually didn't know anything about it. What exactly happened? A moment later, when she heard Hong Yuan and Qing Yuan's report, she was completely dumbfounded. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, Shi Qing, who was sunbathing in his residence, heard the report. His face immediately changed. Jikohai's face turned gloomy after hearing the news. Tong Jinya was completely stunned after hearing the news. Her Majesty actually went to the 9 pavilions alone? The Imperial Court of Dayo was shocked. Chapter 183. In the residence of Great Elder Shi Qing, more than 10 court officials sat in a circle with an ugly look on their faces. Most of them had heard about the assassination today. After all, many people noticed the Empress rushing to the clinic angrily and knew what had happened after asking around. However, no one expected that the Empress would actually bring Rinpoche to the north alone. Not to mention anything else, just the Empress's actions this time around were hard to accept. You chose him as your husband, but no one agreed. You said you would push him to the earthwheel level and everyone accepted it. Afterwards, it was proven that Rinpoche was indeed capable. At least, he had increased the output of Mount Damo's iron ore several times. This changed everyone's view of Rinpoche. However, now that Rinpoche was poisoned by the assassination and the Empress brought him to the north alone, everyone couldn't accept this. Even though there was no such saying in Dayo, everyone had the same thought. If anything happened to the Empress, the whole of Dayo would be in chaos. Furthermore, Great Xia was sharpening its knives. The Empress was the strongest martial artist in Dayo. At this moment, everyone felt that this matter was too thorny. "Sirs, what should we do now? No matter what, we can't let Her Majesty go to Great Xia alone." Tu-Wan looked at everyone and asked. "Let the winged cavalry pick her up," Qin Chuan, the Minister of War, said with a frown. "If the winged cavalry enters Great Xia's territory, Great Xia will not sit idly by. By then, Her Majesty will be in even more danger," someone said. It's also very dangerous now, Qin Chuan immediately said. Although everyone was arguing endlessly, after 4 hours, the 1,500 winged cavalry that camped outside Lan City broke camp and headed north. Earlier, a carrier pigeon had already been sent to Hongwu. However, everyone felt that the possibility of Hongwu stopping the Empress was very small. That Kirin crossed mountains and ridges, and no one knew where the Empress would enter Dayo from. The Empress sat sideways on the Kirin's back. No matter how the Kirin ran or jumped, the Empress's body seemed to be glued to its back. Ren Baqin was placed on the Empress's lap. It had to be said that the Empress really didn't know how to take care of people. Placing Ren Baqin's chest on her lap was already the best she could think of, but in fact Ren Baqin was about to vomit stomach acid. If not for the fact that he was still unconscious, he might have struggled and said, "You should just stab me." Even though Ren Baqin was unconscious, it was only because he was unaware of the outside world. He realized that he was in the middle of the lake in the visualization of water. The surface of the lake wasn't as calm as it used to be. Instead, huge waves surged up to the sky. He wanted to dive down, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't. Every time he wanted to dive down, he felt as if he was blocked by something, and then he was swept away by the waves. He didn't know how long he had been like this. Just as he was about to lose consciousness, he suddenly woke up from his coma. The first thing he felt was that something was poking at his chest, making him want to vomit, but he couldn't. At the same time, he didn't have any strength left in his body. Even turning his head was difficult. At this moment, he was being placed on something and was moving forward. The ground, weeds, and rocks beneath him were all swept backward quickly. The wind was also blowing against his face. When he let out a groan, the cold expression on the Empress's face changed. She lifted him up and placed him on the Kirin's back, sitting beside her. At this moment, Ren Baqin finally woke up a little. From the fragrance he smelled just now, he realized who was beside him. "Your Majesty." Ren Baqin felt that his throat was very dry. He opened his mouth weakly, but his voice was muffled by the wind. "You're awake." The Empress said something that didn't make much sense. "The people who tried to assassinate you are all dead," the Empress continued. "Your Majesty, where are you going?" At this moment, Ren Baqin could finally move his neck a little. However, he didn't look forward like a normal person. Instead, he looked at the Empress who was beside him. The first thing he saw was a pair of clear and bright eyes and eyebrows that were filled with heroic spirit. "Great Xia," the Empress replied with only 2 words. In fact, she didn't know what to say either. She wasn't a woman who cared about others. Going to Great Xia? Ren Baqin's mind was still a little muddled. Even if he wasn't sober, he knew that the Empress was going to Great Xia. This was something that shouldn't have happened. The Empress was the Empress of Dayo, but she actually wanted to go to Great Xia? Also, what was going on with him now? Why did he have to expend so much effort just to move his fingers? "Your Majesty, what happened?" Ren Baqin asked weakly. "You have been poisoned. I will bring you to get the antidote." The Empress's voice became colder. Ren Baqin was dumbfounded. Was he poisoned? The Empress was bringing him to Great Xia to get the antidote? Was Dayo helpless? Was this poison very difficult to deal with? "What will happen if I don't take the antidote?" Ren Baqin asked. "You won't be able to move or speak, but you will be conscious." "How long will it take?" "You must take the antidote within half a month. Otherwise the antidote will be useless." Ren Baqin panicked after hearing this. He wanted to scold someone, but he didn't know who to scold. According to the Empress, this sounded like sclerosis, which was the same as Hawking's. Furthermore, the onset of the disease was more rapid and it would become like that in a short period of time. If it really became like that, he might as well die. "Don't worry, there is an antidote." The Empress comforted him for the first time. If the antidote was easy to get, why would he need the Empress to bring him there personally? What was the status of the Empress? How could she easily enter the borders of Great Xia? Ren Baqin used his small brain to think. This matter wasn't that simple. "Your Majesty, how long have I been unconscious?" Ren Baqin panicked for a long time before he remembered to ask about the time. He was poisoned and not sclerosis. Since it was a poison, it should be able to be cured. It might not work here, but it might work on Earth. Of course, this was just him thinking positively. After all, it wasn't that easy to cure a poison from another world. Furthermore, the time was too short, only half a month. However, he could only think positively. 20 hours, the Empress said. The Empress had been on the road with Ren Baqin for 1 day and 1 night. Ren Baqin calculated the time. The last time he came back was between 11 p.m. and 1 p.m. There were still a few hours left until 2.5 days. Your Majesty, I will go back to Earth. There might be a way, Rinpoche said. The Empress looked at him and asked, How confident are you? I don't know. Rinpoche shook his head and replied bitterly. There are only 15 days left. Now there are only 14 days left. It will take 10 days to travel from Lan City to the 9 pavilions. Even though this Kirin is fast, it will still take 7.5 days. You have to go back twice. Each time it will take at most 2.5 days. Otherwise it will be too late, the Empress said seriously. Even though the Kirin was twice as fast as a fast horse could change horses at full speed. However, this Kirin needed to rest. Therefore it was only left with slightly more than 2 days. If Rinpoche went back twice for 2.5 days each time, he would still have 2.5 days to negotiate with the 9 pavilions or snatch it from them if he failed. If anything went wrong, Rinpoche would suffer a fate worse than death. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.